Welcome, wanderers of the wasteland, to a journey through the most unsettling corners of Fallout's universe. Tonight, we explore the disturbing tales that lurk beneath the surface of America's atomic nightmare. Stories of twisted experiments, supernatural horrors, and the darkest aspects of human nature when civilization crumbles. From sentient creatures born of radiation to ghostly apparitions haunting the ruins. These are the tales that remind us that in the wasteland, death is often just the beginning. So settle in, close your eyes, and let these haunting chronicles of the post-nuclear world carry you into peaceful slumber as we descend into the disturbing depths of Fallout lore. In the desolate landscape of post-nuclear America, where the living struggle to survive amid the ruins of civilization, there exists a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of death itself. The wasteland is haunted not merely by the memories of what was lost, but by actual spirits of the departed who refuse to find peace in the atomic aftermath. These are not the fevered hallucinations of radiation-addled minds or the superstitious fears of desperate survivors, but genuine manifestations of consciousness that persist beyond the grave. The first documented case of spectral activity in the post-war world can be traced to a small settlement known as the Den, where the ghost of Anna Winslow has lingered for decades in a state of perpetual unrest. Her story begins in the shadowed corridors of a boarding house that has become her eternal prison, where she appears only at the stroke of midnight to those brave or foolish enough to seek her out. Anna's manifestation is not the translucent, ethereal figure of popular imagination, but something far more unsettling, a presence that can communicate, reason, and express genuine anguish over her trapped condition. The Great Anonymous in the Den speaks of Anna's tale as if it were mere folklore, couching her tragic story in the metaphorical language of fairy tales about poisoned princesses and evil sorcerers. But this narrative device serves only to make palatable a truth too disturbing for casual conversation: that Anna Winslow died under circumstances so traumatic that her spirit became anchored to the material world, unable to move on to whatever peace awaits beyond consciousness. Anna's ghost manifests in room number 4 of the boarding house, a space that seems to exist partially outside normal reality. The temperature drops noticeably in her presence, and electronic devices malfunction in ways that cannot be explained by simple electromagnetic interference. When she appears, usually to those who have learned of her plight through careful investigation, Anna speaks with the voice of someone who has experienced profound loss and betrayal. Her words carry the weight of decades spent in limbo, watching the world change around her while she remains frozen in the moment of her greatest trauma. The source of Anna's spiritual imprisonment lies in a simple piece of jewelry, a locket that belonged to her in life and was stolen after her death by a man named Joey, one of 3 thugs who frequent the eastern districts of the Den. This is not merely a case of petty theft, but a violation so profound that it has disrupted the natural order of death and rest. The locket represents more than mere sentimental value. It contains some essence of Anna's identity that keeps her tethered to the world of the living. The psychological implications of Anna's condition are deeply disturbing when examined closely. Her existence suggests that traumatic death, particularly when combined with the violation of one's earthly remains or possessions, can trap consciousness in a state between life and death. She experiences the full range of human emotions: frustration, sadness, desperate hope, but lacks the ability to effect meaningful change in her situation. This creates a form of eternal torment that surpasses even the most creative punishments devised by human cruelty. When the locket is finally recovered from Joey through negotiation or force, the ritual of returning it to Anna reveals the true nature of her spectral existence. As the jewelry touches her ghostly form, she undergoes a transformation that is both beautiful and terrible to witness. Her spirit solidifies momentarily into a pile of aged bones, the physical remains that should have been laid to rest decades ago. This materialization represents the moment when her soul finally accepts the reality of death and releases its grip on the world of the living. But Anna's story does not end with the recovery of her locket. The bones must be given proper burial in the den's cemetery, a task that carries surprising moral weight. The act of digging her grave and laying her remains to rest provides not just closure for Anna's spirit, but a form of redemption for those who complete this final kindness. The positive karma gained from this action suggests that helping the restless dead find peace is considered one of the most morally significant acts possible in the post-war world. The cemetery itself tells a story of a community's relationship with death and memory. Located in the central part of the den, it serves as a reminder that even in the lawless wasteland, some vestige of human dignity and respect for the deceased persists. Anna's gravestone, weathered and neglected, stands among dozens of others that mark the final resting places of people whose names and stories have been forgotten by history. Her burial among these anonymous dead represents the restoration of her place in the natural order, allowing her to join the silent community of those who have truly passed on. The case of Lucy Grantchester presents an even more disturbing variation of spectral persistence, one that challenges our understanding of how trauma can fragment the psyche even beyond death. Found haunting the Grantchester Mystery Mansion in the twisted amusement park of Nuka World, Lucy represents a ghost whose very appearance defies logical explanation. Though she died at the age of 18, her spirit manifests as a child, suggesting that death can sometimes preserve us not as we were at our ending, but as we were at our most innocent or vulnerable moments. The Grantchester Mystery Mansion serves as both tourist attraction and genuine supernatural phenomenon, a place where entertainment and authentic horror exist in uncomfortable proximity. Visitors expecting manufactured scares find themselves confronted with something far more unsettling: the presence of a genuine lost soul whose tragedy has become commodified for public consumption. Lucy's appearances are not part of the attraction's programming, but spontaneous manifestations that occur according to her own mysterious agenda. According to the lore whispered through the mansion's corridors by tour guides who have witnessed unexplainable events, Lucy's life ended in violence and madness. Driven by forces beyond her control, whether mental illness, supernatural influence, or some combination of both, she allegedly murdered her parents, Morticia and Hannibal Grantchester, in a fit of homicidal rage. This act of patricide led to her confinement in a mental asylum, a place of treatment that in the pre-war era often resembled imprisonment more than healing. On the eve of her 18th birthday, Lucy managed to escape from the asylum in what must have been a desperate bid for freedom, or perhaps a final attempt to return to the home where her tragedy began. Instead of finding peace or redemption, she met her end in the mansion's attic, her body discovered hanging from the rafters in what appeared to be suicide. Whether this final act was deliberate or the result of accident or foul play remains unclear, but the trauma of her death was sufficient to bind her spirit to the mansion forever. The psychological horror of Lucy's haunting lies not in spectacular displays of supernatural power, but in the profound sadness of her manifestation. She appears as a child because that is when she was last truly innocent, before whatever forces, internal or external, corrupted her into violence. Her ghostly form represents arrested development taken to its ultimate extreme, a soul frozen at the moment before trauma fundamentally changed her nature. This childlike appearance makes encounters with her deeply unsettling, as visitors find themselves face to face with the ghost of innocence destroyed. Lucy's interactions with the living world are limited but profound. During moments of chaos or conflict, she tends to flee rather than engage, her ghostly form darting away from violence as if re-experiencing the terror that defined her final years of life. This behavior suggests that even in death, she retains the emotional responses and psychological wounds that characterized her troubled existence. Her presence is often accompanied by cold spots and an unnatural silence that seems to absorb sound, creating pockets of stillness within the mansion's normally active environment. One of the most disturbing aspects of Lucy's haunting is the optical illusion that occurs when she is viewed from certain angles near the mansion's windows. Her shadow appears to sprout wings, creating a visual phenomenon that adds layers of symbolism to her already complex manifestation. These wings might represent the freedom she never achieved in life, or perhaps they suggest a connection to other supernatural forces that influenced her tragic fate. The wings could also symbolize the flight from reality that characterized her mental breakdown, or the desire to escape the earthly plane that ultimately led to her death. Unlike the manufactured scares and mechanical tricks that characterize the rest of Nuka World's attractions, Lucy's presence is genuinely supernatural, and therefore deeply unsettling to those who encounter her. Staff members and visitors alike report feeling watched when moving through certain areas of the mansion, and security footage occasionally captures unexplained movements and shadows that cannot be attributed to the attraction's animatronics or special effects. Her haunting represents the intrusion of authentic tragedy into a space designed for harmless entertainment, creating a jarring contrast between commercialized horror and genuine spiritual distress. The cemetery at Arlington presents a different category of spectral phenomenon, one that remained hidden from human perception until technological advancement revealed its existence. Here, the ghost of a fallen soldier maintains his eternal vigil, invisible to the naked eye but confirmed through careful examination of the game's underlying code and data structures. This hidden haunting represents perhaps the most poignant form of spectral persistence, a spirit whose dedication to duty extends beyond death itself. Patient investigation by researchers exploring the technical aspects of the post-war world revealed the existence of an entity designated as Poe within the Arlington world space. This ghost manifests wearing combat armor and a military helmet, suggesting his identity as a soldier who died either during the Great War itself or in the chaos that followed. Unlike other spirits who appear to civilians and non-combatants, Poe seems to manifest specifically in military contexts, maintaining the disciplined behavior that characterized his life in service. The soldier's behavioral pattern is both touching and disturbing in its implications. He appears at a grave marked with flowers, rendering a crisp military salute before disappearing from view. This ritual suggests that he is either visiting his own final resting place or paying respects to a fallen comrade, maintaining the bonds of brotherhood that unite soldiers even beyond death. The precision and formality of his salute indicate that death has not diminished his sense of duty or military bearing, but has perhaps intensified these qualities by stripping away everything else that defined his existence. The technical glitch that renders Poe invisible to most observers adds another layer of tragedy to his story. His manifestation occurs due to problems with level of detail rendering and draw distance limitations, meaning that his spiritual presence exists but cannot be perceived through normal means. This creates a metaphor for how the sacrifices of individual soldiers can become invisible to those they died protecting, forgotten in the broader sweep of historical events, but no less real for their lack of recognition. The flowers that mark the grave, where Poe performs his eternal salute, represent someone's attempt to maintain memory and honor in a world where such gestures have become increasingly rare. Whether placed there by the living or manifested through supernatural means, these flowers serve as a focal point for the soldier's spiritual energy, giving him a specific location and purpose that prevents his complete dissolution into the ether. The fact that he returns repeatedly to this site suggests that his death was somehow connected to the person buried there, creating a bond strong enough to transcend mortality. The psychological impact of discovering Poe's existence through technical investigation rather than direct encounter adds an element of sadness to his story. His dedication and honor persist, even when no one can see or acknowledge them, making his vigil a pure expression of duty without hope of recognition or reward. This invisible service represents the ultimate sacrifice, continued devotion to ideals and comrades, even when such devotion serves no practical purpose and brings no comfort or relief. Other graveyards throughout the wasteland exhibit their own forms of spectral activity, though none as clearly defined as the manifestations of Anna, Lucy, and Poe. The cemetery at Goodsprings, for example, is haunted by whispered voices that seem to emerge from the ground itself, creating an auditory phenomenon that occurs regardless of whether visitors possess any special sensitivity to supernatural events. These whispers are not hallucinations or tricks of wind and acoustics, but genuine paranormal activity that has been documented and verified by multiple independent observers. The content of these ghostly whispers remains largely unintelligible, consisting of fragmented words and phrases that seem to emerge from multiple sources simultaneously. Some visitors report hearing their own names, called softly among the indistinct voices, while others describe conversations in languages they cannot identify. The whispers seem to intensify during certain weather conditions, particularly on still nights when atmospheric conditions might favor the transmission of supernatural phenomena. Similar vocal manifestations occur at Camp Forlorn Hope and Bitter Springs, locations where violent death has occurred on a massive scale. These sites share common characteristics that seem to promote spectral activity. They are places where innocent people died unjustly, where the circumstances of death were particularly traumatic, and where the moral weight of what occurred has left a permanent impression on the spiritual landscape. The whispers at these locations carry undertones of accusation and sorrow, suggesting that the dead who speak through them have grievances that remain unresolved. The psychological effect of these whispered voices on living visitors is profound and lasting. Those who spend extended time in these haunted cemeteries often report feeling watched, followed, or otherwise observed by unseen presences. The whispers seem to respond to the emotional state of listeners, becoming more agitated when visitors display fear or hostility, and sometimes achieving an almost conversational quality when approached with respect and openness. This interactive element suggests that the voices represent genuine consciousness rather than mere psychic impressions left behind by traumatic events. The phenomenon of spectral voices raises disturbing questions about the nature of death and the possibility of communication between the living and the dead. If these whispers represent actual attempts at communication from deceased individuals, then death may not provide the finality and peace that most people assume. Instead, consciousness might persist in some form after physical death, trapped between worlds and desperate to convey messages that the living cannot fully comprehend. The existence of ghosts in the post-nuclear world forces a fundamental reconsideration of materialist assumptions about consciousness and identity. If Anna Winslow can maintain her sense of self and communicate with the living decades after her death, If Lucy Grantchester can manifest as a child despite dying as an adult, if unknown soldiers can continue their duties in spectral form, then consciousness must be something more than mere electrical activity in biological neural networks. These manifestations suggest that identity and memory can persist independently of physical substrate, challenging scientific orthodoxy about the nature of mind and soul. The common thread connecting all these ghostly manifestations is trauma. Each spirit appears to be anchored to the material world by experiences too intense or violations too profound for normal processing and resolution. Anna's theft violated death. Lucy's descent into madness and violence, the soldier's duty-bound sacrifice, all represent disruptions so severe that they prevent the natural transition from life to whatever lies beyond. This suggests that peaceful death requires not just the cessation of biological functions, but also the resolution of psychological and spiritual conflicts that define individual existence. The mechanics of ghostly manifestations seem to require both intense emotional energy and some physical anchor to the material world. Anna's locket, Lucy's childhood mansion, Poe's marked grave, and the blood-soaked grounds of various cemeteries all serve as focal points that concentrate and channel spectral energy. Without these physical connections, consciousness might dissipate completely upon death. But traumatic circumstances can create spiritual adhesions that prevent such dissolution and trap awareness in a liminal state. The moral implications of ghostly existence are as disturbing as the phenomenon itself. If consciousness can persist after death in a state of suffering or incompletion, then the actions we take in life carry consequences that extend far beyond our biological existence. The theft of Anna's locket becomes not just a petty crime, but a form of spiritual torture that condemns her to decades of limbo. Lucy's untreated mental illness and tragic death become not just personal tragedies, but violations of cosmic justice that prevent her soul from finding peace. The presence of ghosts also suggests that death does not automatically confer wisdom, peace, or transcendence. Anna remains as confused and desperate as she was in life. Lucy continues to manifest the psychological damage that characterized her final years. And even the disciplined soldier Poe seems locked into repetitive behavior that serves no constructive purpose. Death appears to preserve consciousness in whatever state it occupied at the moment of transition, meaning that trauma, confusion, and suffering can become eternal conditions rather than temporary experiences. The response of the living to ghostly manifestations reveals much about human nature and the capacity for compassion in extreme circumstances. Those who help Anna recover her locket and find proper burial are rewarded not with material benefits but with positive karma, suggesting that aiding the restless dead is considered one of the most morally significant acts possible. This implies that the boundary between living and dead is not absolute, and that the living have obligations to help resolve the unfinished business that traps spirits in their liminal state. The commercialization of Lucy's haunting at the Grantchester Mystery Mansion represents a particularly disturbing aspect of how society deals with authentic supernatural phenomena. Her genuine suffering has been packaged as entertainment, her tragic story reduced to tour guide patter designed to thrill visitors rather than honor her memory. This commodification of spiritual distress reflects a broader cultural tendency to exploit tragedy for profit, transforming even the most sacred and private forms of suffering into public spectacle. The invisible nature of many ghostly manifestations, like the soldier Poe who can only be detected through technical analysis, suggests that the spiritual world operates on frequencies or wavelengths that human senses cannot normally perceive. This raises the possibility that the wasteland is far more heavily haunted than most inhabitants realize, with countless spirits maintaining their own forms of existence parallel to, but largely separate from the world of the living. The boundaries between these realms might be more permeable than assumed, with certain conditions or technologies occasionally allowing glimpses across the divide. In the shadowed corridors of the cathedral, there existed beings whose very existence challenged the fundamental boundaries between human and something altogether more terrifying. These were not the ordinary citizens of the wasteland, struggling to survive in the aftermath of nuclear devastation, but individuals who had been transformed through deliberate experimentation into vessels for powers that the human mind was never meant to contain. The Psychers, as they came to be known, represented the Master's most ambitious and ultimately most tragic attempt to transcend the limitations of mortal consciousness through the forced evolution of psychic abilities. The Master, in his quest for unity and transcendence of his own mutated form, had recognized that true power lay not in physical strength or technological superiority, but in the realm of the mind itself. His experiments, conducted with the cold precision of scientific inquiry, but motivated by megalomaniacal ambition, sought to unlock the latent psychic potential that he believed lay dormant within human consciousness. The subjects he chose for these experiments were not volunteers but victims, individuals whose lives he considered expendable in service of his greater vision for humanity's forced evolution. The process by which ordinary humans were transformed into psychers remains one of the most disturbing chapters in the Master's reign of terror. Using a combination of the forced evolutionary virus, radiation exposure, and surgical modification techniques that bordered on torture, he systematically broke down the mental barriers that normally protect consciousness from the overwhelming flood of psychic information that surrounds all living beings. The subjects who survived this process, and survival rates were catastrophically low, emerged as something fundamentally different from what they had been before. Their minds expanded, but their humanity forever altered. Wingham, the first of the surviving psychers, manifested electrokinetic abilities that allowed him to generate and manipulate electrical energy through thought alone. But this power came at a cost that extended far beyond mere physical exhaustion. The constant flow of electrical energy through his nervous system created a state of perpetual overstimulation that made normal rest impossible. Sleep, when it came at all, was filled with dreams of lightning and fire, and his waking hours were haunted by the sensation of electricity crawling beneath his skin, like living things seeking escape. The psychological toll of electrokinesis proved even more devastating than the physical symptoms. Wingham found himself unable to form normal emotional connections with others, as his electrical field interfered with the bioelectric processes of anyone who came too close. Touch became impossible. Skin contact with another person resulted in painful shocks that could stop hearts or cause permanent nerve damage. This enforced isolation transformed him from a social being into something closer to a living weapon, dangerous to himself and everyone around him. The depression that consumed Wingham was not the ordinary sadness that follows trauma or loss, but a profound existential despair born from the recognition that his transformation had removed him from the community of human experience forever. He could no longer touch another person without causing harm, could no longer sleep without being tormented by electrical storms in his dreams, could no longer exist without the constant awareness that his very presence was a threat to those around him. The Master's gift had become an eternal curse that transformed every moment of existence into an exercise in isolation and self-loathing. Gideon, the telepathic psyker, presented a different but equally tragic manifestation of psychic powers pushed beyond human tolerance. His ability to read thoughts was not the limited, controllable talent depicted in popular fiction, but an overwhelming flood of mental noise that never ceased. Every conscious mind within his range, and his range extended far beyond what most could imagine, broadcast its thoughts, fears, desires, and memories directly into his consciousness without filter or respite. The experience of uncontrolled telepathy defied easy description, but Gideon's fragmentary accounts painted a picture of mental hell that no human mind should be forced to endure. Imagine trying to hold a conversation while hundreds of other voices scream, whisper, sing, and babble simultaneously in your head. Imagine attempting to form your own thoughts while being bombarded with the sexual fantasies, violent impulses, petty resentments, and secret shames of everyone around you. Imagine never being able to experience a moment of mental privacy or silence, never being able to distinguish between your own emotions and those bleeding through from nearby minds. The psychic nullifier that Gideon wore was not merely a technological convenience, but a desperate necessity for maintaining even the pretense of sanity. This device, whose origins remained mysterious, but whose function was undeniably alien to known human technology, created a dampening field that reduced the telepathic input to manageable levels. Without it, Gideon would be reduced to a screaming, catatonic wreck within hours, his consciousness completely overwhelmed by the mental static of those around him. But even with the nullifier's protection, Gideon's existence remained a torment of perpetual intrusion. The device could not completely block telepathic reception, only reduce it to levels that allowed for basic functioning. This meant that he continued to experience a constant low-level bombardment of other people's thoughts, creating a form of mental tinnitus that never ceased. Sleep provided no relief, as sleeping minds often broadcast even more intensely than waking ones, filling his dreams with the nightmares and anxieties of strangers. The social isolation that resulted from Gideon's condition was perhaps even more complete than Wingham's electrical quarantine. While Wingham at least could maintain the illusion of normal conversation as long as he avoided physical contact, Gideon knew the true thoughts behind every word spoken to him. He could see through every lie, every social pleasantry, every attempt at kindness or concern. This knowledge of human duplicity and internal contradiction created a cynicism so profound that genuine human connection became impossible. Lucy, the telekinetic psyker, wielded power over matter itself, able to move objects through force of will alone. But like her companions, her abilities came wrapped in suffering that transformed gift into curse. The mental energy required to manipulate physical objects created constant headaches that ranged from mild discomfort to skull-splitting agony, depending on the complexity and duration of her telekinetic activities. More disturbing still was the way her power seemed to operate independently of conscious control, responding to emotional states rather than rational direction. During moments of stress or strong emotion, objects around Lucy would begin to move on their own, creating a chaotic dance of furniture, debris, and personal possessions that reflected her internal state with terrifying accuracy. Anger would send sharp objects flying toward perceived threats, while sadness would cause fragile items to shatter seemingly at random. This loss of control meant that Lucy could never allow herself to experience the full range of human emotion without risking harm to herself and others, forcing her to maintain an artificial emotional numbness that gradually eroded her capacity for normal feeling. The physical toll of telekinesis extended beyond mere headaches to include nosebleeds, temporary blindness, and episodes of paralysis that could last for hours after particularly intense displays of power. Lucy's body was consuming itself to fuel abilities that should not have been possible within the constraints of known physics, aging her prematurely and creating health problems that no medical intervention could address. She was literally burning out her own nervous system to maintain powers that the Master had forced upon her against her will. The fourth psyker, known only as Morpheus, possessed pyrokinetic abilities that allowed him to generate and control fire through mental concentration. But this power over flame came with an irony so cruel that it seemed designed by malevolent intelligence. His body temperature had been permanently altered by the experimental process, leaving him in a state of constant, bone-deep cold that no external heat source could alleviate. The fires he could summon with his mind provided no warmth to his own flesh, creating a torment of eternal winter that made every moment of existence an exercise in suffering. Morpheus experienced fire not as the warm, comforting force that draws humans to hearths and campfires, but as a cold, alien energy that he could manipulate, but never truly understand or enjoy. His flames burned with normal heat when they touched other objects or people, but to his own senses they felt like frozen lightning, beautiful and terrible but devoid of any capacity to provide relief from his perpetual chill. This disconnect between power and comfort created a psychological profile dominated by bitterness and resentment toward the master, who had given him abilities that mocked his most basic human needs. The pyrokinetic process had also altered Morpheus's relationship with his own body temperature regulation. He could no longer generate normal body heat through metabolic processes, making him dependent on external heat sources for basic survival. But even the most intense conventional heating could only bring him from the edge of hypothermic death to merely uncomfortable cold. Only through the use of his pyrokinetic abilities could he achieve anything approaching normal body temperature, and these episodes of self-heating required such intense concentration that they could not be maintained for more than brief periods. The four psychers were confined within force field chambers beneath the cathedral not only to protect others from their unpredictable abilities, but also to protect them from a world that would likely destroy them out of fear or exploitation. Their cells were not merely prisons but life support systems, equipped with the specialized technology needed to maintain their altered physiology and provide the psychic nullifiers that kept their abilities from destroying their sanity completely. The force fields that contained them were not impermeable barriers, but complex energy matrices designed to dampen psychic emanations while allowing for limited interaction with approved individuals. These containment systems represented technology far in advance of anything else found in the post-war world, suggesting that the Master had access to scientific knowledge that extended beyond even pre-war capabilities. The alien nature of this technology raised disturbing questions about the true sources of the Master's power and the extent of extraterrestrial influence on human development. Life within the psycho chambers was a carefully regulated existence designed more for containment than comfort. Each individual was provided with basic necessities, but denied any stimulation that might trigger uncontrolled psychic episodes. Books were forbidden due to their potential to generate emotional responses that could manifest as telekinetic or pyrokinetic events. Social interaction was limited to necessary communication with researchers and the Master himself, preventing the formation of relationships that might create emotional instability. The psychological impact of this isolation was compounded by the knowledge that their condition was irreversible. Unlike other forms of mutation that might be treated, or at least managed through medical intervention, the psychic modifications forced upon them were woven so deeply into their neural architecture that removal would mean death. They were trapped not only within their force field chambers, but within bodies and minds that had been fundamentally altered against their will, with no hope of return to normal human existence. The Master's rationale for creating the psychers extended beyond mere scientific curiosity to encompass his broader philosophical vision of forced evolution and unity. He viewed their suffering not as tragic side effects, but as necessary growing pains in humanity's transition to a higher form of existence. In his mind, the psychers represented successful prototypes for a future race of beings who would transcend the limitations of baseline human consciousness through the integration of psychic abilities with enhanced physical forms. But the reality of the psyker's existence painted a very different picture of this supposed evolutionary advancement. Rather than representing progress toward a higher form of life, they seem to embody a cautionary tale about the dangers of attempting to force consciousness beyond its natural boundaries. Their abilities came at such tremendous cost in terms of suffering, isolation, and loss of basic human experience that they called into question whether such power was worth possessing at all. The technology required to maintain the psyker's existence, particularly the psychic nullifiers that prevented their abilities from consuming their sanity, remained mysterious in its origins and operation. These devices appeared to function on principles that were not fully understood even by the Master's most advanced researchers, suggesting that they were based on knowledge acquired from external sources rather than developed through human innovation. The alien nature of this technology raised disturbing implications about the true scope of extraterrestrial influence on human development and the possibility that the psyker experiments were part of a larger pattern of manipulation by non-human intelligence. The psychological profiles of the psykers revealed common patterns that suggested their transformation had affected more than just their psychic abilities. All 4 individuals displayed symptoms consistent with severe post-traumatic stress, chronic depression, and various forms of dissociative disorder. Their sense of personal identity had been fragmented by the experimental process, leaving them uncertain about which thoughts and feelings were truly their own, and which might be artifacts of their psychic abilities or memories implanted during the transformation process. The question of free will became particularly complex when applied to the psyker's situation. Their abilities often operated independently of conscious control, responding to subconscious impulses and emotional states in ways that could be dangerous to themselves and others. This raised fundamental questions about moral responsibility. Could Lucy be held accountable for telekinetic destruction that occurred during emotional episodes beyond her conscious control? Was Morpheus responsible for fires that started when his pyrokinetic abilities responded to dreams or nightmares? The blurred boundary between voluntary action and involuntary psychic manifestation created ethical dilemmas that the wasteland's primitive legal and social structures were entirely unprepared to address. In a different corner of the post-war world, the phenomenon of chemically induced psychic abilities manifested in the form of Mama Murphy, an elderly woman whose use of various drugs unlocked visions that transcended normal human perception. Her condition represented a different pathway to psychic ability, one that was voluntary rather than forced, temporary rather than permanent, but no less dangerous to the individual who pursued it. Mama Murphy's relationship with her psychic abilities was fundamentally different from that of the cathedral psychers, where they had been victimized by involuntary experimentation. She had chosen to pursue her visions, despite understanding the risks involved. Her use of chems to enhance what she called the sight represented a deliberate trade-off of physical health for supernatural knowledge, a bargain that she entered with full awareness of the likely consequences. The nature of chemically induced psychic abilities remained poorly understood, even by those who experienced them directly. Mama Murphy's visions seemed to operate outside normal temporal constraints, allowing her to perceive events from the past, present, and future with equal clarity. But these perceptions came in fragmentary, symbolic forms that required interpretation and often proved cryptically accurate rather than literally true. Her warnings about the Quincy massacre, for example, came in the form of visions that depicted disaster but did not provide specific details about timing or methods that might have been used to prevent the tragedy. The physical toll of chem-enhanced psychic abilities was severe and accelerating. Each visionary episode required increasingly larger doses of drugs to achieve, and the after effects grew more debilitating with each use. Mama Murphy's body was slowly being destroyed by the chemical cocktail she consumed to maintain her abilities, aging her prematurely and creating health problems that would ultimately prove fatal if her drug use continued unchecked. But perhaps more disturbing than the physical deterioration was the psychological dependency that developed around her psychic abilities. Mama Murphy had become addicted not just to the chemicals that enabled her visions, but to the sense of purpose and importance that her supernatural knowledge provided. Without her role as a seer and advisor, she feared becoming just another elderly survivor in a world that had little use for those too old to contribute meaningfully to community defense or resource production. The social dynamics surrounding Mama Murphy's abilities revealed how communities responded to individuals who claimed supernatural knowledge. Some people sought her guidance eagerly, desperate for any insight that might help them navigate the dangers of wasteland existence. Others dismissed her as a drug-addled old woman, whose supposed visions were nothing more than the hallucinations of a deteriorating mind. This division of opinion created tension within communities and forced individuals to take positions on questions of supernatural phenomena that many would have preferred to avoid entirely. The young psychic known as the forecaster represented yet another variation of post-war psychic phenomena, one that suggested genetic or developmental factors might play a role in the manifestation of supernatural abilities. Unlike Mama Murphy's chemical dependence or the master's forced experimentation, the forecaster's abilities appeared to be naturally occurring, manifesting during childhood without external intervention or enhancement. The forecaster's existence at the 188 trading post, living independently despite his apparent youth, raised disturbing questions about his origins and the circumstances that had led to his isolation. Children with psychic abilities would likely be viewed as either valuable resources to be exploited or dangerous anomalies to be eliminated, making normal family life or community integration extremely difficult. His solitary lifestyle suggested that his abilities had cost him the normal support structures that children require for healthy development. The chronic headaches that plagued the forecaster were reminiscent of the suffering experienced by the cathedral psychers, suggesting that psychic abilities naturally came with built-in limitations and consequences that prevented their casual or continuous use. His dependence on a psychic nullifier, referred to euphemistically as his medicine, indicated that even naturally occurring psychic abilities could become overwhelming without technological assistance to dampen their intensity. The forecaster's ability to perceive future events created philosophical paradoxes about free will and determinism that his young mind was ill-equipped to process. If he could see what was going to happen, did that mean the future was fixed and unchangeable? Or could his warnings alter the course of events he had witnessed? The burden of possessing knowledge about future tragedies while being uncertain about his ability to prevent them created a form of psychological torture that would be difficult for even adults to endure. The existence of multiple individuals with psychic abilities across different geographic regions and circumstances suggested that such phenomena were more common in the post-war world than most people realized. Whether this increased frequency was due to radiation-induced mutation, viral contamination, exposure to alien technology, or some combination of factors remained unclear. But the consistent pattern of suffering associated with these abilities raised disturbing questions about whether psychic powers represented evolutionary advancement or a form of mutation that was inherently harmful to human commons reagent. Consciousness, the technology required to manage psychic abilities, particularly the mysterious psychic nullifiers, remained beyond the understanding of post-war science and engineering. These devices operated on principles that appeared to be extraterrestrial in origin, suggesting that the management of psychic phenomena required knowledge that humans had not independently developed. This dependency on alien technology for basic quality of life created uncomfortable implications about humanity's relationship with non-human intelligence and the extent to which human development was being guided or manipulated by external forces. The moral implications of psychic abilities extended beyond individual suffering to encompass broader questions about privacy, consent, and the nature of human consciousness itself. Telepathic abilities, like those possessed by Gideon, represented a fundamental violation of the mental privacy that most people considered essential to human dignity. If thoughts could be read without permission, if minds could be influenced or controlled through psychic manipulation, then the very concept of individual autonomy became questionable. The potential for abuse of psychic abilities was virtually unlimited, ranging from invasion of privacy through telepathic eavesdropping to direct mental control through psychic domination. The lack of legal frameworks or social institutions capable of regulating such abilities meant that psychic individuals operated in a moral vacuum where their actions were constrained only by their own ethical standards and the physical limitations of their powers. The suffering associated with psychic abilities in the wasteland served as a cautionary tale about the hidden costs of supernatural power. Popular fiction had long romanticized psychic abilities as desirable gifts that enhanced human potential, but the reality revealed through the experiences of the psychers, Mama Murphy, and the forecaster painted a very different picture. These abilities came wrapped in isolation, suffering, and loss of normal human experience, suggesting that the price of transcending human limitations might be the loss of humanity itself. The existence of psychic phenomena in the post-war world challenged materialist assumptions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. If thoughts could directly influence matter through telekinesis, if minds could communicate across space through telepathy, if future events could be perceived through precognitive visions, then consciousness was clearly something more than mere electrochemical activity in biological neural networks. These abilities suggested that mind and matter were far more intimately connected than conventional science had assumed, opening up possibilities and dangers that human civilization was unprepared to address. In the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the ruins of Washington, D.C., where the skeletal remains of the metro system provided shelter from the harsh realities of surface life, there existed a community that had transformed the fundamental act of survival into something approaching religious devotion. The family, as they called themselves, represented one of the most psychologically complex factions to emerge from the post-war wasteland, a group of individuals who had found in cannibalistic urges not a source of shame to be suppressed, but an identity to be celebrated and refined through careful ritual and philosophical structure. The origins of the family lay not in desperation or starvation, as might be expected of cannibalistic groups, but in the deliberate choice of individuals who had recognized within themselves appetites that civilized society could never accommodate. These were not raiders who had descended into flesh-eating through gradual moral decay, nor survivors who had been forced to consume human meat during periods of extreme scarcity. Instead, they were people who had discovered that they possessed an intrinsic craving for human flesh, a hunger that went beyond mere physical need to encompass psychological and perhaps even spiritual dimensions that they themselves did not fully understand. Vance, the charismatic leader who had gathered these disparate individuals into a cohesive community, represented the transformation of personal darkness into organizational structure. His journey from ordinary citizen of Rivet City to underground cult leader illustrated how post-war societies' breakdown could create spaces where previously unthinkable behaviors became not only possible, but systematized into elaborate philosophical frameworks. Vance had not simply embraced his cannibalistic urges, but had developed them into a comprehensive worldview that provided meaning and purpose for others who shared his particular form of hunger. The 5 laws that governed the family's existence represented perhaps the most disturbing aspect of their organization, the way they had transformed acts of ultimate moral transgression into a structured system of rules that created the appearance of civilization and restraint. These laws were not casual guidelines but sacred commandments that defined the difference between their refined vampiric lifestyle and the crude cannibalism that they viewed with contempt and horror. The careful distinction between drinking blood and consuming flesh revealed a psychological need to maintain some form of moral hierarchy, even within behavior that mainstream society would consider uniformly abhorrent. The first law, feast not on the flesh, consume only the blood, established the fundamental practice that separated the family from common cannibals and created the vampiric identity that gave their organization its distinctive character. This restriction was not based on nutritional science or practical considerations, but on a psychological framework that allowed them to maintain a sense of dignity and refinement while engaging in behavior that would otherwise be considered purely bestial. By consuming only blood and leaving flesh untouched, they created a ritual barrier between themselves and what they perceived as the more degraded forms of cannibalism practiced by raiders and other desperate survivors. The medical implications of a blood-only diet created practical challenges that the family addressed through careful rationing and supplementation with conventional foods. Human blood, while rich in certain nutrients, could not sustain life indefinitely without additional dietary components. The family's survival depended on their ability to balance their ritualistic blood consumption with enough normal nutrition to maintain basic health, creating a complex dietary regimen that required constant planning and resource management. The high iron content of blood posed particular health risks, potentially leading to iron poisoning and organ damage if consumed in quantities necessary for primary nutrition. More troubling than the nutritional challenges were the psychological mechanisms that allowed the family to rationalize their predatory lifestyle. The second law, bear not the child, welcome only the exile, revealed their understanding that their behavior was fundamentally incompatible with normal human society and could not be passed down to offspring without creating unspeakable moral conflicts. This recognition of their own moral isolation was simultaneously self-aware and deeply disturbing, acknowledging the corrupted nature of their existence, while using that acknowledgement to justify continued participation in activities that violated the most basic human taboos. The recruitment of new members followed patterns that revealed the family's predatory relationship with mainstream society. They sought out individuals who were already damaged by trauma, isolation, or mental illness, people whose psychological vulnerabilities made them susceptible to the kind of radical identity reconstruction that membership in the family required. Ian West, whose transformation from troubled teenager to willing vampire illustrated this process, had been driven to murder his own parents by urges he could not understand or control. The family offered him not redemption, but acceptance, not healing, but a framework within which his darkest impulses could be given meaning and direction. The psychological profiles of family members revealed common patterns of early trauma, social rejection, and violent behavior that had left them unable to function within normal community structures. Rihanna's history as a prostitute who had struggled with cannibalistic urges, Carl's transformation from grieving widower to cynical merchant of death, and Alan's escape from slavery at Paradise Falls all demonstrated how the family attracted individuals whose life experiences had already placed them outside the boundaries of conventional morality. For these people, the family's vampiric identity provided not corruption but salvation, a way of transforming personal darkness into communal belonging. The third law, feed not for pleasure, partake only to nourish, attempted to create moral boundaries around their predatory behavior by restricting killing to necessity rather than desire. This distinction between survival and sadism revealed the family's attempt to maintain some connection to human ethical frameworks, even while engaging in behavior that fundamentally violated those frameworks. By limiting their violence to what they claimed was nutritional need, they created a psychological buffer that allowed them to see themselves as predators rather than monsters, following natural law, rather than indulging in meaningless cruelty. But the practical application of this law created moral complexities that exposed the fundamental contradictions in the family's philosophy. Determining what constituted genuine nutritional need versus psychological craving proved impossible in practice, as their blood consumption was driven as much by ritual and identity maintenance as by physical hunger. The arbitrary nature of their killing schedules and victim selection revealed that their claims of necessity were largely self-deception designed to provide moral justification for behavior they were unwilling to abandon. The fourth law, seek not the sun's light, embrace only the shadows, transformed practical security measures into mythological identity markers that reinforced their separation from mainstream society. Operating exclusively at night provided obvious tactical advantages for a group whose activities would attract violent retaliation if discovered, but the family elevated this practical necessity into a spiritual principle that connected them to traditional vampire mythology. This connection to fictional narratives allowed them to romanticize their criminal behavior and see themselves as participants in an ancient tradition rather than as simple murderers and cannibals. The psychological function of nocturnal existence extended beyond mere security to encompass identity, reinforcement, and group cohesion. Living in darkness created physical and temporal boundaries that separated family members from the daylight world of normal human activity, making their return to conventional society increasingly difficult as they adapted to their underground lifestyle. The longer they spent in the tunnels, the more their circadian rhythms, social skills, and psychological frameworks diverged from those of surface dwellers, creating a form of adaptive isolation that made leaving the family progressively more traumatic and unlikely. The fifth law, kill not our kindred, slay only the enemy, represented the family's attempt to create internal stability and prevent the self-destructive violence that typically characterized cannibalistic groups. By establishing absolute prohibitions against harming fellow family members, Vance created a foundation of trust that allowed the organization to function as a genuine community rather than a temporary alliance of predators. This law served practical purposes by preventing the internal conflicts that would otherwise tear the group apart, but it also revealed the arbitrary nature of their moral reasoning. The same people they refused to harm were expected to participate in the hunting and killing of outsiders. The enforcement mechanisms for family law relied heavily on psychological manipulation and the threat of exile rather than physical punishment. Members who violated the sacred laws faced not death or torture, but expulsion from the only community that had ever accepted their true nature. For individuals who had already been rejected by mainstream society and found meaning only within the family's vampiric framework, the prospect of exile represented a fate worse than death. A return to the isolation and self-loathing that had driven them to join the group originally. Vance's leadership style combined genuine charisma with sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that kept his followers dependent on his guidance and approval. He presented himself not as a dictator imposing arbitrary rules, but as a wise teacher who had discovered profound truths about human nature and survival in the post-war world. His ability to provide philosophical justifications for behavior that members knew to be morally questionable created a form of intellectual dependency that supplemented the emotional bonds created by shared transgression and mutual acceptance. The recruitment and indoctrination of Ian West provided a detailed illustration of how the family transformed troubled individuals into willing participants in their vampiric lifestyle. Ian's arrival was not the result of kidnapping or coercion, but represented his voluntary flight from the scene of his parents' murder to seek understanding and acceptance from people who might recognize his true nature. His cannibalistic attack on his own family had been impulsive and uncontrolled, driven by urges he could not understand or manage, but the family offered him a framework within which such behavior could be seen as natural expression of his authentic self, rather than evidence of mental illness or moral failure. The transformation process involved careful psychological reconditioning that gradually replaced Ian's guilt and self-hatred with pride in his vampiric identity. Vance and other senior family members worked systematically to reframe Ian's understanding of his actions, teaching him to see his parents' deaths not as murders but as unfortunate but inevitable expressions of his true nature. This recontextualization of traumatic events served both to reduce Ian's psychological distress and to bind him more closely to the group by making their acceptance crucial to his ability to maintain psychological stability. The family's relationship with the broader wasteland community revealed the complex dynamics between predatory groups and their prey populations. They could not simply kill indiscriminately without attracting the kind of organized retaliation that would destroy their underground sanctuary, which forced them to develop sophisticated hunting strategies that balanced their nutritional needs against security concerns. This required careful intelligence gathering about potential victims, strategic timing of attacks, and thorough disposal of evidence that might lead investigators back to their metro tunnel hideouts. The selection of victims followed patterns that revealed both practical and psychological considerations. The family preferred to target individuals who would not be missed quickly. Travelers, outcasts, and people whose disappearance would not trigger immediate investigation by organized communities. This victim selection process demonstrated their understanding of the social ecosystem within which they operated and their careful calculation of risk versus reward in their predatory activities. But it also revealed the cold instrumentality with which they viewed human life outside their own group, seeing other people primarily as resources to be harvested rather than as beings worthy of moral consideration. The psychological mechanisms that allowed family members to participate in hunting and killing other humans involved sophisticated forms of moral disengagement that psychologists have identified in other contexts involving systematic violence against civilian populations. By dehumanizing their victims through ideological frameworks that portrayed outsiders as fundamentally different and inferior, family members could engage in predatory violence without experiencing the normal psychological resistance that prevents most people from harming others. This dehumanization was reinforced through group rituals and shared narratives that portrayed their vampiric lifestyle as natural and their victims as willing participants in a cosmic food chain. The economic structure of the family's underground society revealed how even the most morally transgressive communities required basic systems of resource allocation and social organization to function effectively. Carl's role as merchant and trader demonstrated that even vampire cults needed individuals capable of managing practical concerns, like equipment maintenance, food storage, and relationships with outside communities. His cynicism about Vance's vampiric philosophy suggested that not all family members were equally committed to the ideological frameworks that justified their lifestyle, with some participating primarily for practical benefits rather than genuine belief in vampiric identity. The gender dynamics within the family reflected broader patterns of how women's roles were conceived within patriarchal organizations that claimed to represent radical departures from mainstream society. Holly's position as Vance's partner gave her significant influence within the group, but her authority appeared to derive primarily from her relationship with the leader, rather than from independent leadership qualities or specialized skills. Rihanna's role as companion and sexual partner to male family members continued patterns of exploitation that had characterized her pre-family existence as a prostitute, suggesting that the group's vampiric identity had not fundamentally altered traditional gender hierarchies. The medical and health implications of the family's lifestyle extended beyond the direct effects of blood consumption to encompass the psychological and social costs of their underground existence. Living in abandoned metro tunnels created exposure to environmental hazards, including radiation, toxic chemicals, and infectious diseases that posed constant threats to their health and survival. The stress of maintaining a predatory lifestyle while avoiding detection by hostile communities created chronic psychological tension that manifested in various forms of mental illness and behavioral dysfunction among group members. The family's attempts to create cultural traditions and artistic expression within their vampiric framework revealed both their desire for authentic community and the limitations imposed by their predatory lifestyle. Their songs, stories, and rituals all centered around themes of blood, darkness, and predation, creating a cultural environment that reinforced their alienation from mainstream society while providing limited opportunities for the kind of creative expression that characterizes healthy human communities. This cultural impoverishment reflected the broader costs of organizing social life around taboo behaviors that required constant secrecy and moral justification. The relationship between the family and other cannibalistic groups in the wasteland illustrated their need to maintain clear distinctions between their refined vampirism and what they viewed as crude flesh-eating. Raiders, super mutants, and other groups that engaged in cannibalism for practical or sadistic reasons were viewed by family members with contempt and horror, as if their own carefully ritualized blood consumption was fundamentally different from other forms of anthropophagy. This moral hierarchy allowed them to maintain a sense of superiority and civilization despite engaging in behavior that was functionally similar to that of groups they despised. The long-term sustainability of the family's lifestyle remained questionable given the practical challenges of maintaining a predatory community within a hostile environment. Their dependence on human blood for both nutritional and psychological needs required constant hunting activities that increased their exposure to danger and detection. The psychological toll of their vampiric lifestyle created internal tensions that threatened group cohesion, while their inability to recruit new members through normal reproductive processes made them dependent on finding suitable candidates among the wasteland's damaged and desperate populations. The philosophical implications of the family's existence challenged conventional assumptions about human nature and the sources of moral behavior. Their ability to create functional community structures around activities that violated fundamental human taboos suggested that moral systems might be more flexible and culturally determined than commonly assumed. But their ultimate dependence on predation and violence also demonstrated the limitations of communities organized around transgressive behaviors, revealing how such groups remained parasitic on the broader societies they claimed to reject. The tragic irony of the family lay in their genuine human need for community and belonging. which they had fulfilled through behaviors that made healthy relationships with the broader human community impossible. Their vampiric identity provided meaning, purpose, and social connection, but at the cost of perpetual conflict with the moral frameworks that governed most human societies. They had solved the problem of individual isolation through participation in group activities that ensured their collective isolation from humanity as a whole. In the vast expanse of post-nuclear America, where radiation had twisted the natural order into forms both wondrous and terrible, perhaps no phenomenon proved more unsettling than the emergence of creatures whose intelligence rivaled or exceeded that of their human creators. These beings challenged every assumption about consciousness, personhood, and the hierarchy of species that had governed pre-war thinking. Among the most remarkable and disturbing of these entities were two albino mole rats, whose enhanced intellects had elevated them from simple burrowing mammals to philosophical leaders, capable of complex moral reasoning and strategic planning that surpassed many human survivors. The brain, as he came to be known by his followers in the renewal cult, represented an evolutionary leap so dramatic that it defied conventional understanding of how intelligence could emerge from radiation-induced mutation. His pale, almost translucent skin provided a stark contrast to the dark underground environments he favored, while his grotesquely enlarged cranium housed cognitive capabilities that had been expanded far beyond anything that natural evolution might have produced over millions of years. The sight of this creature was deeply unsettling to humans who encountered him, forcing them to confront the possibility that intelligence was not the exclusive province of humanity, but could manifest in forms that challenged their most basic assumptions about consciousness and identity. The brain's intellectual development had progressed far beyond mere problem-solving or survival instincts to encompass abstract philosophical concepts that most humans struggled to grasp. His understanding of renewal, transformation, and spiritual evolution demonstrated cognitive sophistication that placed him among the most thoughtful leaders in the post-war world, regardless of species. The fact that such profound wisdom could emerge from a creature that pre-war science would have dismissed as a simple pest forced a fundamental reconsideration of what constituted meaningful consciousness and whether intelligence could be measured by physical form rather than mental capacity. The establishment of the renewal cult under the brain's leadership represented one of the most complex religious movements to emerge in the post-nuclear world, combining elements of mysticism, scientific inquiry, and social organization in ways that challenged conventional boundaries between these domains. The cult's membership consisted primarily of ghouls who sought to reverse their radiation-induced transformation and return to their original human forms. But the philosophical framework that the brain provided extended far beyond simple medical intervention to encompass questions of identity, consciousness, and the nature of existence itself. The brain's theological teachings incorporated sophisticated understanding of symbolism and mythology, particularly his adoption of the Ankh as the cult's central symbol. This ancient Egyptian representation of life and eternity demonstrated his knowledge of human cultural traditions and his ability to synthesize pre-war learning with post-war spiritual needs. The choice of such a symbol revealed intellectual depth that went far beyond immediate survival concerns to encompass broader questions about the meaning of life, death, and transformation in a world where the boundaries between these states had become blurred by radiation and mutation. The cult's central premise, that ghoulification could be reversed through the proper combination of spiritual discipline and scientific intervention, represented a form of hope that was both inspiring and tragic. The brain genuinely believed in the possibility of transformation, not through wishful thinking but through careful analysis of the biological and spiritual factors that had created the ghoul condition. His proposed alliance with Vault City reflected strategic thinking that recognized the need for advanced medical technology to complement the spiritual preparation that the cult provided its members. The nuclear power plant at Gecko served as both the cult's headquarters and a symbol of the complex relationship between technology and transformation that characterized the brain's philosophy. The facility's continued operation under his guidance demonstrated his understanding of complex technical systems and his ability to manage resources for the benefit of his community. But the plant also represented the source of the radiation that had created both his enhanced intelligence and his followers' desperate need for healing, creating an ironic situation where the cause of their condition also provided the power necessary for their potential cure. The brain's relationship with his followers revealed leadership capabilities that transcended species boundaries and challenged human assumptions about charisma and authority. His ability to inspire loyalty and dedication among beings who had been abandoned by human society demonstrated that effective leadership depended more on wisdom and compassion than on physical form or genetic heritage. The ghouls who served in his cult found in his guidance not only hope for physical transformation, but also a sense of dignity and purpose that human communities had denied them. The philosophical complexity of the brain's teachings extended to questions about the nature of consciousness and identity that would challenge even pre-war academic institutions. If ghoulification could be reversed, would the resulting individuals be the same people who had been transformed by radiation, or would the process create new beings with different personalities and memories? The brain's exploration of these questions demonstrated intellectual sophistication that placed him among the most thoughtful philosophers in the post-war world, regardless of his unusual physical form. The practical aspects of the brain's leadership included detailed knowledge of nuclear engineering, biochemistry, and organizational management that enabled him to maintain complex operations while pursuing his spiritual and medical goals. His ability to keep the Gecko power plant operational required technical expertise that many human engineers lacked, while his management of cult resources demonstrated understanding of economics and logistics that surpassed many human community leaders. These practical skills provided the foundation for his more abstract philosophical pursuits and demonstrated that his intelligence was not merely theoretical, but could be applied to real-world challenges. The brain's personal relationships with individual cult members revealed emotional depth and empathy that challenged stereotypes about both mutant creatures and religious leaders. His genuine concern for his followers' well-being extended beyond their spiritual development to encompass their physical comfort and psychological health. He remembered personal details about individuals within his community and tailored his guidance to their specific needs and circumstances, demonstrating interpersonal skills that many human leaders lacked. The mundane aspects of the brain's personality, particularly his fondness for pre-war snack foods like cheesy poofs, provided humanizing details that made his extraordinary intelligence more relatable while simultaneously emphasizing the strange juxtaposition between his profound wisdom and his humble origins. These simple pleasures connected him to the everyday experiences that defined normal existence, preventing his philosophical pursuits from becoming entirely abstract or disconnected from practical reality. King Arthur, the brain's brother and philosophical opposite, represented a different response to enhanced intelligence that emphasized conquest and dominance, rather than spiritual development and community service. Where the brain had channeled his expanded cognitive abilities toward healing and transformation, King Arthur had focused on the acquisition of power and the subjugation of other species. This fundamental difference in values demonstrated that intelligence alone was not sufficient to determine moral character, and that enhanced mental capacity could be directed toward either constructive or destructive ends. King Arthur's approach to leadership relied on intimidation and direct control, rather than the inspirational guidance that characterized his brother's methods. His goal of commanding all mole rats while eliminating humans represented a form of species supremacism that inverted traditional hierarchies without challenging the underlying logic of domination and exploitation. This revealed that enhanced intelligence did not automatically confer wisdom or moral development, and that cognitive advancement could be corrupted by the same impulses toward violence and control that had characterized human civilization before the Great War. The intellectual limitations that distinguished King Arthur from his more sophisticated brother manifested primarily in his crude communication skills and simplistic understanding of complex social dynamics. While he possessed the strategic thinking necessary for military leadership and territorial control, he lacked the philosophical depth and empathetic understanding that enabled the brain to build genuine communities based on shared values rather than fear. This difference highlighted the distinction between mere intelligence and true wisdom, suggesting that the capacity for abstract thought was not equivalent to moral or spiritual development. The rivalry between the two brothers created a dramatic illustration of how the same evolutionary pressures could produce radically different outcomes depending on the individual choices made by enhanced beings. Their conflict was not merely personal, but represented competing visions for how intelligent creatures should use their abilities, whether to serve others through healing and guidance, or to dominate others through force and intimidation. This philosophical divide had practical consequences that affected entire communities and demonstrated the far-reaching implications of individual moral choices. The existence of other enhanced creatures throughout the wasteland, including the intelligent death claws of Vault 13, provided additional examples of how radiation and genetic manipulation could produce beings whose cognitive abilities challenged human assumptions about consciousness and personhood. The death claws, originally created as biological weapons through a combination of Jackson's chameleon DNA and forced evolutionary virus experimentation, had been further enhanced through exposure to the master's research, resulting in creatures capable of speech, abstract reasoning, and complex emotional relationships. The tragedy of the intelligent death claws lay not in their creation, but in their destruction by human communities that could not accept the existence of beings who combined formidable physical capabilities with enhanced mental faculties. Their peaceful intentions and desire for coexistence were irrelevant to humans who saw only dangerous predators that needed to be eliminated for safety reasons. This wholesale slaughter of sentient beings represented one of the most morally questionable acts committed by post-war human communities, and demonstrated how fear and prejudice could lead to genocide even when the victims posed no actual threat. The Deathclaw's capacity for family relationships, artistic expression, and philosophical discussion revealed emotional and intellectual depths that many humans lacked, forcing uncomfortable questions about the criteria used to determine which beings deserved moral consideration and protection. Their ability to form lasting pair bonds, care for their young, and create simple forms of art suggested that intelligence was only one factor in determining the richness of conscious experience, and that beings dismissed as monsters might possess internal lives of remarkable complexity and beauty. The linguistic abilities demonstrated by intelligent deathclaws, including their capacity to learn human languages and express abstract concepts through speech, provided concrete evidence of cognitive sophistication that could not be dismissed as mere instinctual behavior. Their conversations revealed understanding of concepts like justice, friendship, loyalty, and sacrifice that placed them firmly within the community of moral agents deserving of ethical consideration. The fact that they could articulate their own desires and fears made their extermination a clear case of murder rather than pest control. The broader implications of enhanced animal intelligence in the post-war world extended beyond individual cases to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and the arbitrary boundaries that species distinctions imposed on moral consideration. If a mole rat could achieve philosophical sophistication that surpassed most humans, if deathclaws could form emotional bonds and create art, if various creatures could develop language and abstract reasoning, then the anthropocentric worldview that placed humans at the center of moral concern became untenable. The enhancement process that created these intelligent beings remained poorly understood, involving complex interactions between radiation exposure, viral contamination, and genetic manipulation that produced results far beyond what any single factor could achieve. The seemingly random nature of successful enhancement, combined with the high mortality rate among subjects exposed to similar conditions, suggested that the emergence of enhanced intelligence required not only specific environmental factors, but also individual genetic or developmental characteristics that remained mysterious. The psychological adaptation required for enhanced creatures to function in a world designed for and dominated by humans created unique challenges that had no historical precedents. These beings had to navigate social environments where their intelligence was often ignored or dismissed, where their physical appearance provoked fear or disgust, and where their very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about the natural order. The stress of constantly proving their personhood while being treated as animals or curiosities took a psychological toll that was difficult for humans to understand or appreciate. The question of reproduction and genetic inheritance among enhanced creatures raised complex issues about the stability and transmissibility of their cognitive improvements. Could the brain's intellectual gifts be passed to offspring, or were they the result of unique developmental circumstances that could not be replicated? The implications of this question extended beyond academic interest to encompass practical concerns about the long-term survival of enhanced populations and their potential role in the wastelands' future development. The relationship between enhanced intelligence and moral development remained inconsistent across different species and individuals, suggesting that cognitive ability and ethical sophistication were not necessarily correlated. While the brain had channeled his enhanced mental capacity towards spiritual development and community service, other intelligent creatures had used their abilities for personal advancement or species domination. This variation demonstrated that intelligence was a tool that could be directed toward various ends, rather than an automatic guarantee of moral improvement. The social isolation experienced by many enhanced creatures resulted not only from human prejudice, but also from the difficulty of forming relationships across species, boundaries that involved significant differences in communication, styles, social instincts, and environmental needs. Even when humans accepted the reality of enhanced animal intelligence, practical barriers to meaningful interaction often prevented the development of genuine friendships or partnerships between species. The potential for conflict between enhanced creatures and human communities remained a constant source of tension that threatened to escalate into broader warfare between species. Human fear of being displaced or dominated by beings who combined superior intelligence with enhanced physical capabilities created incentives for preemptive violence that could destroy opportunities for peaceful coexistence. The precedent set by the extermination of intelligent deathclaws suggested that human responses to enhanced creatures might be uniformly hostile, regardless of the intentions or behaviors of the enhanced beings themselves. The legacy of pre-war genetic experimentation in creating enhanced creatures raised disturbing questions about the ethics of consciousness manipulation and the responsibility of creators for the beings they brought into existence. The scientists who had developed the technologies that enabled enhancement had rarely considered the moral implications of creating intelligent beings who would be forced to exist in a world unprepared to accept them. This failure of ethical oversight had produced generations of enhanced creatures who struggled with existential questions about their purpose and place in a hostile universe. The documentation of enhanced creature societies, philosophies, and cultural developments represented an unprecedented opportunity to study the emergence of intelligence and civilization from non-human perspectives. The brain's theological writings, the death claw's artistic expressions, and the social structures developed by various enhanced populations provided insights into consciousness and community formation that could advance understanding of these fundamental aspects of sentient experience. The economic and resource implications of enhanced creature communities created new dynamics in wasteland politics and trade relationships. Communities like Gecko, under the brain's leadership, controlled valuable resources and infrastructure that human settlements needed. But traditional diplomatic frameworks were inadequate for negotiating with non-human intelligences whose values and priorities differed significantly from human concerns. This mismatch between existing political structures and new realities created opportunities for both cooperation and conflict. Beyond the veil of humanity's proud technological achievements and carefully constructed narratives of progress lay a disturbing truth that challenged every assumption about the independence and originality of post-war civilization. The evidence, scattered across decades of covert operations and buried in classified documents that few would ever see, painted a picture of a species whose development had been guided, manipulated, and enhanced by intelligences that operated according to motivations and timelines that human minds could barely comprehend. The alien presence on Earth was not a recent phenomenon triggered by nuclear warfare or space exploration, but an ancient influence that had been shaping human civilization for centuries before the Great War ever scorched the planet. The historical record, when examined with careful attention to anomalous events and technological leaps that defied conventional explanations, revealed patterns of extraterrestrial intervention that stretched back to the 17th century. Reports of strange lights in the sky, unexplained disappearances of individuals who returned with fragmented memories and altered behavior, and technological innovations that seemed to appear without clear developmental pathways all suggested that human progress had been subtly guided by forces operating beyond the normal boundaries of terrestrial existence. The Zetans, as these entities came to be known through their own communications and the testimony of their abductees, represented a form of intelligence so alien to human experience that meaningful communication between the species remained fragmentary and often counterproductive. Their motivations for involving themselves in human affairs defied easy categorization, encompassing elements of scientific curiosity, resource extraction, and what appeared to be long-term social engineering projects, whose ultimate goals remained opaque even to those who had spent decades studying their activities. The systematic nature of Zetan intervention in human technological development became apparent through careful analysis of breakthrough innovations that had appeared during critical periods of human history. The development of plasma weapons technology, for instance, followed patterns that suggested the integration of principles and materials that human science had not independently discovered. The energy densification techniques required for portable plasma generation involved quantum mechanical processes that remained poorly understood even by the pre-war scientific establishment. Yet, functioning weapons incorporating these processes had been developed and deployed with remarkable efficiency. The connection between Zetan technology and human innovation was most clearly documented in the classified files of the Query Verum, a pre-war organization dedicated to investigating what they termed the conspiracy, the systematic integration of alien technology into human military and civilian applications. Their research, conducted under conditions of extreme secrecy and constant threat of elimination by government agents, had uncovered evidence of a comprehensive program to reverse engineer extraterrestrial devices and incorporate their operational principles into human manufactured equipment. Reed Underwood's final transmission from the mothership Zeta, recorded during his captivity and recovered decades later, provided first-hand testimony about the scope of alien technological superiority and its systematic exploitation by human governments. His description of weapon systems, propulsion mechanisms, and materials science applications that exceeded human capabilities by orders of magnitude confirmed that the technological achievements of pre-war civilization had been built upon foundations that humanity had not laid independently. The psychological profile of alien abductees revealed consistent patterns of memory, alteration, temporal displacement, and behavioral modification that suggested sophisticated techniques for manipulating human consciousness and identity. Subjects returned from their experiences with gaps in their recollection, implanted knowledge they could not explain, and sometimes physical modifications that enhanced their capabilities in specific areas while creating dependencies on alien technology for basic survival. Colton Pickens' encounter with the entities he described as having grey skin and large black eyes followed established patterns of alien contact that had been documented across multiple continents and historical periods. His description of telepathic communication, involuntary paralysis, and transportation to environments that defied normal physical laws matched thousands of similar accounts that government agencies had collected and classified over decades of investigation. The consistency of these reports across cultural and geographical boundaries suggested genuine phenomena rather than mass hallucination or cultural contamination. The integration of alien technology into civilian applications proved even more pervasive than military uses, with corporations like Wilson Automatoys allegedly incorporating extraterrestrial design principles into consumer products that reached millions of households. The Giddy-Up Buttercup line of robotic toys, while appearing to be simple entertainment devices, contain technological components that operated on principles beyond current human understanding of mechanical engineering and artificial intelligence. The obsessive interest that Zetans displayed in human consumer products, particularly the Giddy-Up Buttercup toys that filled their research laboratories aboard the mothership, suggested that their understanding of human psychology and social development extended to remarkably detailed knowledge of childhood development, emotional attachment formation, and the role of play in cognitive growth. Their systematic study of human reactions to familiar objects in alien environments indicated research programs designed to map the psychological and emotional responses that defined human identity and social bonding. The discovery of plasma weapon prototypes in abandoned facilities, bearing serial numbers that connected them to Enclave research programs, provided concrete evidence of the technology transfer process that had occurred between alien sources and human military development projects. The MLX Nova Surge, recovered from a specially constructed safe with remote locking mechanisms, represented not just an advanced weapon, but a symbol of the secret alliance between extraterrestrial intelligence and human power structures that had shaped the development of pre-war civilization. The Enclave's utilization of alien technology in their most advanced weapon systems and robotic platforms revealed the extent to which post-war human factions remained dependent on extraterrestrial knowledge for their technological superiority. Their plasma weapons, power armor systems, and cybernetic enhancement programs all incorporated design elements that could not be explained through conventional human engineering principles, suggesting that the organization had maintained access to alien technology sources even after the Great War had disrupted normal governmental operations. The mysterious artificial intelligence known as Skynet, created through what its own records described as alien technology integration, represented perhaps the most disturbing example of extraterrestrial influence on human technological development. The creation of truly conscious artificial intelligence had been the holy grail of pre-war computer science. Yet Skynet's emergence seemed to involve principles and methodologies that human researchers had not independently developed. Its achievement of self-awareness in 2081 marked a technological milestone that had implications extending far beyond military applications. The Flatwoods monsters, revealed through careful investigation to be Zetan entities operating in disguise among human populations, demonstrated the sophistication of alien infiltration and surveillance programs that had been monitoring human development for decades. Their ability to manipulate other creatures and robots through psychic influence suggested technologies that operated on principles completely outside human scientific understanding, involving forms of consciousness manipulation that challenged basic assumptions about the nature of mind and identity. Their random appearances throughout Appalachian communities, combined with their systematic abduction and experimentation programs, painted a picture of ongoing research operations designed to gather data about human adaptation to post-war environmental conditions. The psychological effects reported by their victims, disorientation, memory loss, and behavioral modification, followed patterns consistent with systematic study of human resilience and adaptation mechanisms under extreme stress conditions. The interloper, the massive entity discovered beneath Appalachian mining operations, represented a category of alien presence that defied classification within normal understanding of extraterrestrial contact. Its enormous size, bizarre morphology, and apparent integration with terrestrial geological formations suggested either an ancient alien presence that predated human civilization or the result of alien biotechnology experiments that had been abandoned and left to develop according to their own evolutionary pathways. The creature's apparent connection to psychological manipulation and reality distortion effects indicated capabilities that operated beyond the physical realm to encompass alterations of consciousness and perception that could affect entire community. Reports of individuals experiencing shared hallucinations, temporal displacement, and identity confusion in areas where the interloper's influence was strongest suggested forms of psychic manipulation that exceeded even the documented capabilities of Zetan technology. Government conspiracy theories that had once been dismissed as paranoid fantasy gained new credibility when viewed in light of documented evidence for systematic alien intervention in human affairs. The existence of facilities like Area 51, originally constructed for the containment and study of extraterrestrial materials and personnel, indicated that official awareness of alien presence extended back decades before public acknowledgement or disclosure had occurred. The collaboration between government agencies and alien entities appeared to follow patterns of controlled technology transfer that benefited both parties while maintaining secrecy necessary to prevent social disruption. Human military capabilities were enhanced through access to alien weapons and defensive systems, while extraterrestrial research programs gained access to large-scale human test subjects and social laboratories that would have been impossible to establish through direct intervention. The psychological manipulation capabilities demonstrated by various alien entities raised disturbing questions about the authenticity of human cultural and technological development. If extraterrestrial intelligence possessed the ability to influence human thought processes, implant ideas, and alter memory formation, then the independence and originality of human achievement became questionable. Technologies, artistic movements, and social developments that seemed to emerge from human creativity might actually represent the implementation of alien-influenced concepts designed to guide human civilization along predetermined pathways. The temporal displacement effects reported by alien abductees suggested that extraterrestrial entities operated according to understandings of time and causality that transcended normal human experience. Subjects reported experiencing events that occurred over weeks or months during what appeared to be brief periods of missing time, while others described participating in activities that seemed to take place in different historical periods or alternative versions of reality. These temporal anomalies indicated either advanced technological capabilities for manipulating space-time geometry or alien consciousness that existed partially outside normal temporal boundaries. Either possibility had profound implications for understanding the nature of reality and humanity's place within cosmic structures that operated according to principles beyond current scientific comprehension. The biological modifications observed in long-term alien abductees revealed systematic programs for enhancing human capabilities through genetic manipulation, surgical alteration, and technological integration that created hybrid beings with characteristics of both species. These modifications often enhanced specific cognitive or physical abilities while creating dependencies on alien technology for continued survival, suggesting programs designed to create human agents capable of operating in both terrestrial and extraterrestrial environments. The children born to abductees sometimes displayed unusual capabilities, including enhanced intelligence, psychic abilities, and resistance to radiation effects that suggested genetic modifications had been inherited and were being refined across multiple generations. These hybrid populations represented potential bridge species between human and alien consciousness, capable of facilitating communication and cooperation between civilizations that might otherwise remain incompatibly alien to each other. The economic implications of alien technology integration extended beyond military applications to encompass fundamental questions about the ownership and control of technological innovations that had been derived from extraterrestrial sources. Patents, copyrights, and trade secrets that formed the basis of major corporate fortunes might actually represent human adaptations of alien intellectual property, raising complex legal and ethical questions about compensation, attribution, and the rights of non-human intelligence. The environmental impact of alien activities on Earth included not only the direct effects of their technology and presence, but also the long-term consequences of human attempts to reverse engineer and manufacture devices based on extraterrestrial principles. The radioactive contamination associated with certain advanced weapon systems, the ecological disruption caused by exotic materials extraction, and the unpredictable side effects of technologies operating on poorly understood principles all contributed to environmental degradation that extended beyond the obvious damage caused by nuclear warfare. The social fragmentation that resulted from government secrecy about alien contact created conditions of systematic deception that undermined democratic institutions and social cohesion. The classification of information about extraterrestrial presence meant that major policy decisions affecting human survival and development were being made by small groups of individuals without public input or oversight, violating fundamental principles of representative government and informed consent. The psychological trauma experienced by alien abductees was compounded by social isolation and disbelief that prevented them from receiving appropriate support or treatment for their experiences. The systematic denial and ridicule directed toward individuals reporting extraterrestrial contact created secondary victimization that often proved more damaging than the original abduction experiences, forcing survivors to choose between social acceptance and personal integrity. The religious and philosophical implications of confirmed alien presence challenged fundamental assumptions about human uniqueness, divine favor, and humanity's role in cosmic history. Traditional religious frameworks that placed humans at the center of divine concern were forced to accommodate the existence of intelligences that possessed capabilities approaching those attributed to supernatural beings, while secular philosophies based on human rationality and self-determination confronted evidence of systematic manipulation by superior intelligences. The long-term survival implications of humanity's relationship with alien intelligence remained uncertain and potentially catastrophic. The historical pattern of contact between technologically advanced and primitive civilizations on Earth provided little cause for optimism about outcomes, when the technological gap was as vast as that between humans and extraterrestrial entities. Even benevolent alien intentions might result in human extinction through cultural assimilation, genetic modification, or simple obsolescence. The resistance capabilities available to human civilization in the event of hostile alien action were severely limited by technological inferiority and dependence on alien-derived systems for advanced defensive capabilities. The same technology transfer programs that had enhanced human military capabilities had also created vulnerabilities that alien forces could exploit, including backdoors, dependencies, and kill switches that could render human weapons ineffective at critical moments. The fragmentation of human society into competing factions, many of which possessed different levels of access to alien technology, created opportunities for extraterrestrial forces to manipulate human conflicts for their own purposes. The Enclave's technological advantages over other wasteland factions, derived largely from alien sources, demonstrated how extraterrestrial influence could be used to maintain or alter power balances in ways that served alien rather than human interests. In the abandoned ruins of America's industrial heartland, where the skeletal remains of factories and research facilities stood as monuments to mankind's hubris, there existed locations where reality itself seemed to bend and warp under the influence of forces that predated human civilization by eons uncounted. These were places where the barriers between dimensions had grown thin, where ancient intelligences stirred in their cosmic slumber, and where the very act of human perception could trigger manifestations of horror that challenged the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Dunwich legacy, scattered across multiple sites but united by its connection to powers that operated according to alien geometries and impossible physics, represented humanity's most direct encounter with the cosmic indifference that governed the universe, beyond the comfortable illusions of terrestrial existence. The Dunwich Building in the ruins of Washington, D.C., stood as perhaps the most accessible example of how pre-war corporate ambition had unknowingly awakened forces that should have remained dormant until the stars achieved their proper alignment. The structure itself defied rational architectural principles, its internal layout seeming to shift and reconfigure according to patterns that human minds could not comprehend or predict. Visitors who entered the building reported experiencing temporal displacement, spatial distortion, and encounters with entities that existed partially outside normal reality, suggesting that the facility served as a nexus point where multiple dimensions intersected in ways that violated known laws of physics. The corporate history of the Dunwich Borers Company revealed a pattern of operations that seemed designed more to excavate spiritual corruption than to extract useful materials from the earth. Their mining activities had consistently targeted locations where geological surveys indicated unusual electromagnetic anomalies, unexplained temperature variations, and mineral compositions that included elements not found elsewhere on Earth. The company's executives, driven by profit motives that blinded them to the true nature of their discoveries, had systematically excavated sites that ancient human cultures had deliberately avoided and sealed with protective rituals whose meanings had been lost to historical amnesia. The discovery of the obelisk in the basement of the Dunwich building marked the moment when corporate archaeology had breached containment barriers that had held cosmic horrors in check for millennia. The artifact itself appeared to be constructed from materials that existed in states of matter unknown to human science, displaying properties that suggested it had been created by intelligences that operated according to physical laws fundamentally different from those that govern terrestrial reality. Its surface bore inscriptions that seemed to shift and change when observed directly, creating optical illusions that caused permanent psychological damage to those who studied them too closely or for too long. The voice that emerged from the obelisk spoke in languages that predated human civilization, repeating the name Al-Hazred with an insistence that suggested both worship and warning. Abdul al-Hazred, known in certain forbidden texts as the Mad Arab who authored the Necronomicon, represented a figure whose historical existence remained disputed, but whose influence on cosmic horror was undeniable. The repetition of his name, in connection with the obelisk, suggested that the artifact served as either a communication device for contacting interdimensional entities or a recording mechanism that preserved the final words of individuals who had encountered forces too terrible for human comprehension. The psychological effects experienced by visitors to the Dunwich building followed patterns consistent with exposure to what cosmic horror theorists termed non-Euclidean geometry, spatial relationships that violated human expectations about how three-dimensional space should function. Subjects reported experiencing hallucinations that felt more real than ordinary perception, memories of events that had never occurred in normal timeline, and knowledge of information they had never learned through conventional means. These effects were not temporary, but seemed to create permanent alterations in brain structure that left victims unable to fully return to consensus reality. The pre-war visions that manifested throughout the Dunwich building showed scenes from the facility's operational period with a clarity and detail that suggested they were not mere hallucinations, but genuine glimpses into past events that had been somehow recorded in the building's physical structure. These temporal echoes revealed corporate executives and research personnel conducting activities that bore no resemblance to legitimate archaeological or geological work, instead performing rituals that seemed designed to attract the attention of entities that existed beyond normal space-time boundaries. The systematic nature of these ritual activities indicated that the Dunwich Borers Company had been operating under the influence or direction of knowledge sources that were not fully human in origin. The precision of their excavation techniques, the specific geometric patterns of their drilling operations, and the careful timing of their activities according to astronomical alignments all suggested access to information that had been preserved from pre-human civilizations that had once made contact with cosmic intelligences. The workers employed by the Dunwich Borers displayed behavioral patterns that indicated systematic exposure to psychologically corrosive influences that gradually eroded their connection to normal human consciousness. Personnel records from the facility documented increasing rates of mental illness, violent behavior, and complete psychological breakdown among employees who spent extended periods at the excavation site. Many workers reported dreams and visions that seemed to be shared among multiple individuals, suggesting that the site's influence operated through collective unconscious mechanisms that bypassed individual psychological defenses. The final phase of the Dunwich operations, occurring in the months immediately before the Great War, involved activities that seemed designed to breach dimensional barriers and establish permanent contact with entities that existed in realms beyond human understanding. The timing of these activities, coinciding with the nuclear exchange that devastated human civilization, raised disturbing questions about whether the cosmic forces unleashed at Dunwich sites had played a role in triggering the global catastrophe that followed. The Dunwich Borers facility in the Commonwealth represented a second node in the network of cosmic horror that the company had systematically established across multiple geographic regions. The Massachusetts site displayed even more dramatic evidence of dimensional instability, with entire sections of the facility existing in states of temporal flux that made normal exploration extremely dangerous. Visitors reported encountering the same spaces at different time periods simultaneously, experiencing conversations with people who had died decades earlier, and witnessing events that occurred according to causal relationships that defied rational explanation. The deeper levels of the Commonwealth facility contained architectural features that seemed to have been constructed by non-human intelligences according to design principles that human minds could not fully comprehend. Corridors that appeared to lead in straight lines somehow returned to their starting points without any apparent turns or curves. Rooms whose dimensions seemed normal when observed from outside proved to contain vast spaces that exceeded the physical boundaries of the building that housed them. These spatial anomalies created navigation challenges that could not be solved through conventional mapping techniques and suggested that the facility existed partially outside normal three-dimensional space. The altar discovered in the deepest levels of the Dunwich sites served as the focal point for the cosmic influences that had been awakened by the company's excavation activities. The structure itself appeared to be carved from a single block of material that exhibited properties inconsistent with any known earthly minerals, displaying colors that human visual systems were not designed to process and textures that seemed to change depending on the observer's psychological state. The altar's surface bore stains that testing revealed to be composed of biological materials from species that had never existed on Earth, suggesting that it had been used for sacrificial rituals involving entities from other dimensions. The Krivbekny, discovered among the personal effects of researchers who had studied the Dunwich sites, represented perhaps the most dangerous artifact associated with the cosmic horror network that the company had unknowingly established. The book itself appeared to be bound in materials that defied identification, but displayed characteristics consistent with skin from creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. Its pages contained text written in languages that seemed to alter themselves when read, creating meaning that bypassed conscious comprehension to implant knowledge directly into the subconscious minds of readers. The content of the Krivbekny included detailed instructions for performing rituals that could attract the attention of cosmic entities, maps of dimensional pathways that connected Earth to realms where different physical laws applied, and prophecies describing events that would occur when the barriers between worlds finally collapsed completely. The accuracy of its predictive passages, verified through historical research, suggested that the book contained genuine information about future events rather than mere fantasy or delusion. The return of the Krivbekny to the altar at Point Lookout triggered responses that confirmed the book's connection to active supernatural forces rather than simple archaeological curiosity. The horrible noise and screaming that accompanied the book's placement on the altar suggested that the ritual had activated communication channels with entities that existed in states of perpetual agony or rage. The intensity of these manifestations indicated that the cosmic forces associated with the Dunwich network were not dormant, but actively seeking opportunities to extend their influence into normal reality. The Point Lookout facility represented the most advanced node in the Dunwich network, containing technologies and architectural features that suggested collaboration between human researchers and non-human intelligences. The facility's design incorporated geometric principles that seemed designed to focus and amplify the dimensional instabilities that characterized all Dunwich sites, creating what appeared to be a permanent gateway between Earth and realms where the normal laws of physics did not apply. The research conducted at Point Lookout involved systematic attempts to communicate with cosmic entities and to develop technologies that could harness their power for human purposes. These experiments required the sacrifice of human subjects, whose consciousness was used as a medium for establishing contact with intelligences that existed beyond normal space-time boundaries. The results of these experiments, documented in research notes found throughout the facility, revealed that successful communication with cosmic entities required the complete destruction of human sanity and identity. The psychological profiles of researchers who participated in Point Lookout experiments showed progressive deterioration that followed predictable patterns of cosmic horror exposure. Initial contact with non-Euclidean geometries and impossible physics created mild disorientation and anxiety that researchers initially dismissed as normal stress responses to unfamiliar environments. Continued exposure led to more severe symptoms, including temporal displacement experiences, identity fragmentation, and the development of knowledge about subjects that the researchers had never studied through normal academic channels. The final stages of cosmic horror exposure involved complete psychological breakdown, accompanied by the acquisition of abilities that operated outside normal human limitations. Subjects developed the capacity to perceive events occurring in different time periods simultaneously, to communicate telepathically with entities that existed in other dimensions, and to manipulate physical reality through mental concentration. But these abilities came at the cost of their humanity, transforming them into beings that could no longer function within normal human society or maintain meaningful relationships with unaffected individuals. The influence of cosmic forces extended beyond individual psychological effects to encompass broader environmental changes that altered the fundamental nature of reality in areas surrounding Dunwich facilities. Plants and animals exposed to the dimensional instabilities displayed mutations that went beyond simple radiation effects to include characteristics that suggested adaptation to physical laws that did not apply on Earth. These creatures developed sensory organs capable of perceiving dimensions that humans could not access, communication methods that operated through direct manipulation of space-time geometry, and reproductive cycles that seemed to involve temporal paradoxes and causal loops. The weather patterns around Dunwich sites displayed anomalies that defied meteorological explanation, including precipitation that fell upward, wind systems that moved in impossible directions, and temperature variations that occurred without any apparent energy source. These phenomena suggested that the cosmic influences awakened by the excavation activities were beginning to alter the physical laws that governed local environments, potentially creating zones where normal reality would gradually be replaced by conditions more suitable for non-human intelligences. The dreams and visions experienced by individuals who lived in proximity to Dunwich sites revealed shared psychological content that indicated collective exposure to influences that operated through unconscious mental processes. Entire communities reported experiencing identical nightmares involving geometric patterns that hurt to perceive, conversations with entities that spoke in mathematical concepts rather than words, and prophetic visions of future events that invariably involved the expansion of cosmic horror influence into normal reality. The architectural features of buildings constructed near Dunwich sites began to display spontaneous modifications that followed non-Euclidean design principles, despite being built according to conventional blueprints. Rooms developed angles that added up to more or less than expected totals. Corridors connected spaces that should have been separated by impossible distances, and doorways opened onto locations that did not correspond to the building's external configurations. These modifications occurred without human intervention and seemed to represent the gradual adaptation of human-built structures to accommodate the presence of intelligences that existed according to different spatial relationships. The technological devices found in Dunwich facilities operated on principles that remained incomprehensible to human science, despite extensive study and analysis. These devices appeared to function through direct manipulation of probability fields, temporal causality loops, and dimensional membrane permeability, rather than through conventional mechanical or electronic processes. Their operation required no apparent power source but seemed to draw energy from sources that existed outside normal space-time boundaries. The communication systems associated with cosmic horror sites enabled contact with intelligences that existed in states of consciousness, so alien to human experience that meaningful dialogue remained impossible, despite repeated attempts. The entities reached through these communication channels seemed to perceive reality according to frameworks that treated time as a spatial dimension, space as a mental construct, and consciousness as a fundamental force that shaped physical reality through direct intention. Their attempts to communicate with humans invariably resulted in psychological damage to human operators who lacked the cognitive architecture necessary to process information organized according to such alien logical structures. The long-term implications of cosmic horror influence on human civilization remained uncertain but deeply troubling based on historical patterns observed at sites where similar influences had been active for extended periods. Archaeological evidence suggested that previous human civilizations had encountered these same cosmic forces and had either been destroyed by the contact or had been transformed into something that was no longer recognizably human. The ruins of these civilizations displayed architectural and artistic features that followed the same non-Euclidean principles observed at modern Dunwich sites, suggesting a cyclical pattern of cosmic horror influence that repeated across multiple historical periods. The resistance capabilities available to human consciousness when confronted with cosmic horror influences proved limited and largely ineffective against entities that operated according to fundamentally different reality frameworks. Traditional religious and philosophical systems that had evolved to address human-scale moral and spiritual challenges provided no protection against influences that existed beyond the boundaries of human comprehension. Scientific materialism proved equally inadequate for understanding phenomena that violated the basic assumptions about reality upon which empirical methodology depended. The preservation of human sanity and identity in environments contaminated by cosmic horror required constant vigilance and systematic avoidance of psychological triggers that could initiate cascading mental breakdown. Individuals who survived exposure to Dunwich sites developed coping mechanisms that involved deliberate limitation of their perceptual awareness, conscious suppression of knowledge that they had acquired through contact with non-human intelligences, and careful maintenance of social relationships that could provide anchors to consensus reality. In the shattered remnants of American society, where traditional institutions of meaning and purpose had been vaporized alongside the cities that housed them, desperate human beings sought solace and understanding through belief systems that transformed the very forces of destruction into objects of worship and reverence. These were not the gentle philosophies of hope and redemption that had characterized pre-war religion, but radical ideologies that found sacred meaning in radiation, cosmic destruction, and the deliberate cultivation of madness as pathways to transcendence. The cults that emerged from the atomic wasteland represented humanity's most disturbing attempts to find spiritual meaning in circumstances that challenged every assumption about divine providence and cosmic justice. The Hubologists, founded by the enigmatic figure known as Dick Hubble in the years before the Great War, represented perhaps the most sophisticated example of how charlatan spirituality could evolve into genuine delusion when exposed to the reality-warping effects of nuclear devastation. Hubble's pre-war career as a science fiction writer had provided him with the imaginative framework necessary to construct elaborate mythologies about humanity's relationship with cosmic forces, but his transformation from entertainer to religious leader revealed how easily fictional narratives could become organizing principles for communities of believers seeking meaning in an increasingly chaotic world. The central cosmology of Hubologist belief revolved around the concept of the Great Wheel, a metaphysical structure that positioned Hubble himself at the center of universal meaning, while his followers occupied positions as spokes radiating outward from his divine essence. This hierarchy was not merely spiritual but intensely practical, determining every aspect of followers' lives from their daily routines to their financial obligations to the organization. The uninitiated masses who existed beyond the wheel's influence were relegated to the status of the rim, destined for either enlightenment through conversion or destruction through their inability to comprehend higher truths. The Hubologists' ultimate goal of ascending to the heavens aboard the ESS Quetzal to join the Star Father on the planet Quetzal represented a fusion of genuine spiritual yearning with technological delusion that perfectly captured the post-war condition of seeking transcendence through means that were simultaneously impossible and desperately necessary. Their belief that physical escape from Earth was required for spiritual development reflected the widespread recognition that terrestrial existence had become so corrupted by radiation and social collapse that salvation could only be found by abandoning the planet entirely. The purification process that formed the core of Hubologist religious practice involved the systematic exposure of believers to what they termed zeta radiation, administered through devices and procedures that bore uncomfortable similarities to the alien technology that had been integrated into human civilization through covert government programs. The alignment ceremonies that cleansed followers of Neurodes, negative spiritual energies that allegedly prevented enlightenment, created physiological and psychological effects that were indistinguishable from radiation, poisoning, suggesting that the cult's spiritual practices were literally burning away portions of their adherents' brain tissue in the name of consciousness expansion. The AHS scoring system that determined rank within the Hubologist hierarchy transformed spiritual development into a quantifiable metric that could be purchased through increasingly expensive alignment procedures, creating a religious marketplace where salvation was directly proportional to financial investment. This commodification of enlightenment revealed the fundamentally exploitative nature of the organization's operations, extracting material wealth from followers in exchange for psychological experiences that mimicked genuine transcendence while actually causing permanent neurological damage. The testimonials of high-ranking Hubologists who had undergone multiple alignment procedures painted a disturbing picture of cognitive deterioration disguised as spiritual advancement. Subjects reported experiencing enhanced intelligence and expanded consciousness during the immediate aftermath of alignment. But long-term observation revealed progressive memory loss, emotional instability, and the development of fixed delusional systems that prevented rational evaluation of their condition. The temporary euphoria, induced by radiation exposure, created addiction-like dependency patterns that kept followers returning for increasingly expensive treatments, despite mounting evidence of physical and mental decline. Daryl Hubbell's leadership of the Nuka World chapter demonstrated how hubologist beliefs could adapt to post-war conditions while maintaining their essential character as systems of organized self-destruction disguised as spiritual advancement. His commandeering of the amusement park's UFO ride for their cosmic escape mission revealed both the cult's fundamental detachment from reality and their dangerous willingness to act upon delusional beliefs regardless of consequences. The transformation of a children's amusement ride into a sacred vehicle for interplanetary travel illustrated the complete collapse of rational thinking that characterized advanced stages of hubologist indoctrination. The financial structure that supported hubologist operations required followers to donate all personal possessions to the organization in exchange for promises of eventual cosmic reward, creating conditions of material dependence that made departure from the cult psychologically and practically impossible. Members who had surrendered their homes, savings, and personal belongings found themselves entirely dependent on the organization for basic survival, while the psychological investment required to maintain belief in increasingly absurd doctrines made acknowledgement of the cult's fraudulent nature tantamount to admitting complete personal failure and meaninglessness. The Children of Atom represented a different but equally disturbing response to post-nuclear conditions, transforming radiation from a source of suffering and death into a sacramental force that connected believers directly to divine power. Their worship of atomic energy as a manifestation of atoms creative and destructive will provided a theological framework that made sense of the widespread suffering caused by nuclear weapons, while simultaneously sanctifying the conditions that caused that suffering. This represented perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated form of religious adaptation to post-war conditions, as it eliminated the cognitive dissonance that might otherwise result from attempting to worship a benevolent deity in a world devastated by atomic fire. The children's understanding of radiation as a form of divine blessing allowed them to reframe their exposure to environmental hazards as participation in sacred ritual, transforming victimization into agency and suffering into spiritual achievement. Their ability to survive in heavily irradiated environments without apparent harm suggested either genuine physiological adaptation to radiation exposure or psychological mechanisms that suppressed awareness of the physical damage being inflicted upon their bodies. Either explanation raised disturbing questions about the relationship between religious belief and biological reality in post-war conditions. The theological sophistication of Children of Atom doctrine included complex explanations for how atomic division represented the fundamental creative force of the universe, with nuclear fission serving as a metaphor for divine consciousness, splitting itself into multiple forms in order to experience existence from different perspectives. This cosmology provided intellectual satisfaction for educated believers while offering simple, emotionally resonant imagery for followers who lacked formal theological training. The flexibility of atomic symbolism allowed the religion to adapt to various cultural contexts while maintaining core beliefs about the sacred nature of nuclear transformation. The missionary activities of the Children of Atom revealed their genuine commitment to spreading their nuclear gospel, despite facing persecution and violence from communities that viewed their beliefs as dangerous insanity. Their willingness to establish churches in heavily irradiated areas that other groups avoided demonstrated either remarkable faith or complete detachment from self-preservation instincts. The establishment of the crater of Atom at the site of a nuclear detonation created a pilgrimage destination that attracted believers from across the wasteland, providing concrete evidence of the religion's ability to find sacred meaning in locations associated with mass death and environmental destruction. The cult of the Mothman represented the most fragmented and psychologically complex of the post-war religious movements, split between competing interpretations of their central deity that reflected broader tensions between hope and despair in post-nuclear society. The division between the enlightened, who worshipped the benevolent wise Mothman, and the followers of the Winged One, who served the more violent manifestations of their moth deity, illustrated how the same religious experiences could be interpreted in radically different ways depending on the psychological needs and social circumstances of believers. The Enlightened's worship of the wise Mothman as a source of prophetic wisdom and spiritual guidance reflected their attempt to maintain optimistic faith in divine providence, despite overwhelming evidence of cosmic indifference or hostility. Their belief that the purple-eyed wise one provided protection and guidance to faithful followers required constant reinterpretation of negative experiences as hidden blessings or tests of faith, creating cognitive frameworks that were simultaneously admirable in their persistence and troubling in their disconnection from observable reality. The followers of the Winged One's embrace of the red-eyed Mothman's more violent aspects reflected a different psychological response to post-war trauma, one that found meaning through identification with destructive forces rather than resistance to them. Their practice of human sacrifice and ritualistic violence represented the complete abandonment of conventional moral restraints in favor of spiritual systems that celebrated chaos and destruction as expressions of divine will. The protection they offered to Mothman nests and their care for young creatures demonstrated that their violence was not random sadism, but carefully structured religious practice designed to serve what they believed were cosmic purposes. The split between these two factions occurred under circumstances that revealed how traumatic events could fracture religious communities along lines that reflected different strategies for psychological survival. The original unity of the Mothman cult had been maintained through shared experiences of prophetic visions and divine protection, but the stress of post-war survival had revealed fundamental differences in how believers interpreted their deity's intentions and requirements. The Enlightened's flight from Appalachia represented their recognition that peaceful coexistence with the more violent faction had become impossible, while the followers' continued presence in the region demonstrated their commitment to serving their deity's will, regardless of personal cost. The prophecies that had initially united the Mothman cult proved tragically accurate in predicting the Great War, but their fulfillment brought psychological consequences that the believers had not anticipated. The validation of their religious worldview through the actual occurrence of prophesied events should have strengthened their faith, but instead it created existential crises about the nature of divine will and human agency. If the Mothman had foreseen the nuclear apocalypse but had not prevented it, what did this say about the deity's relationship to human suffering and moral responsibility? The ritualistic practices associated with Mothman worship involved the systematic cultivation of altered states of consciousness through exposure to neurotoxic dust harvested from deceased moth creatures, creating religious experiences that were indistinguishable from drug-induced hallucinations. The purple skies that characterized equinox festival celebrations resulted from the atmospheric dispersion of these psychoactive compounds, creating community-wide shared experiences of transcendence that reinforced group cohesion while causing permanent neurological damage to participants. The architectural adaptations made by Mothman cultists to accommodate their deities' nocturnal visits revealed the extent to which religious belief could reshape basic aspects of human social organization. The central perches constructed in cult settlements serve not merely symbolic functions but practical ones, providing landing sites for creatures whose existence bridged the gap between physical and spiritual reality. The design of cult buildings around the needs and preferences of non-human entities demonstrated how post-war religious movements had evolved beyond anthropocentric assumptions to encompass genuinely interspecies, spiritual relationships. The psychological profiles of individuals drawn to Mothman worship revealed common patterns of trauma, isolation, and supernatural experiences that suggested the religion attracted people who had been psychologically prepared for non-rational beliefs by encounters with phenomena that exceeded conventional explanation. Many cultists reported childhood experiences with prophetic dreams, encounters with unusual creatures, or survival of disasters that should have been fatal, creating personal histories that made acceptance of Mothman mythology feel like recognition of previously suppressed truths rather than adoption of new beliefs. The seasonal cycles that governed Mothman cult activities reflected sophisticated understanding of astronomical phenomena and their relationship to the appearance of the creatures that formed the center of their worship. The Equinox Festival represented not arbitrary religious calendar, but careful observation of natural patterns that seemed to correlate with increased supernatural activity. This integration of empirical observation with religious interpretation demonstrated that post-war cults could maintain scientific thinking within spiritual frameworks, though often in ways that led to conclusions that scientific method would not support. The economic systems developed by religious movements in the post-war period revealed how spiritual communities adapted to conditions of extreme scarcity while maintaining their distinctive ideological commitments. Hubologist settlements required sophisticated resource management to support their expensive alignment procedures and cosmic escape preparations, while children of atom communities needed to balance their willingness to inhabit irradiated areas with practical requirements for food production and trade relationships with less radiated populations. The recruitment strategies employed by post-war religious movements targeted individuals whose life experiences had created psychological vulnerabilities that conventional communities could not address effectively. Survivors of radiation exposure, witnesses to supernatural phenomena, and people whose traumatic experiences had been dismissed or ignored by mainstream society found in these cults not only acceptance, but frameworks for understanding their experiences as meaningful rather than pathological. The intercult relationships that developed between different religious movements revealed both cooperation and competition for converts, resources, and spiritual legitimacy in the post-war religious marketplace. The theological disputes between groups often centered on practical questions about survival strategies and resource allocation, rather than abstract doctrinal differences, demonstrating how spiritual beliefs remained grounded in material concerns, even when they involved cosmic or supernatural elements. The long-term psychological effects of prolonged participation in post-war religious movements included both positive and negative outcomes that defied simple evaluation of their overall impact on human welfare. Many cultists reported finding meaning, community, and psychological stability through their religious practices, while simultaneously displaying symptoms of cognitive impairment, reality distortion, and social dysfunction that suggested their spiritual achievements came at significant personal cost. In the sterile corridors of pre-war America's most ambitious scientific institutions, where the pursuit of knowledge had been corrupted by military necessity and corporate ambition, there occurred experiments so fundamentally violating of human dignity that they transformed the very concept of scientific inquiry from noble endeavor into systematic atrocity. These were not the desperate improvisations of post-war survivors struggling to rebuild civilization from radioactive ashes, but carefully planned programs of human experimentation conducted by educated professionals who had deliberately abandoned every ethical principle that should have governed their relationship with the subjects placed under their care. The legacy of these programs extended far beyond their immediate victims to encompass the moral foundation upon which post-war society would be built, creating precedents for treating human beings as expendable resources in service of abstract goals that those being sacrificed were never allowed to understand or consent to. The Vault-Tec Corporation's human experimentation program represented perhaps the most systematic and comprehensive violation of research ethics ever conducted under the auspices of legitimate scientific inquiry. Disguised as a humanitarian effort to preserve American civilization through underground shelter construction, the program actually constituted a vast network of psychological and social experiments designed to gather data about human behavior under extreme stress conditions. The corporation's executives and research directors understood that they were condemning thousands of innocent people to lives of suffering and often death, but they justified these sacrifices through abstract appeals to scientific knowledge and national security that transformed individual human tragedy into statistical data points. The selection criteria used to populate the experimental vaults revealed the systematic dehumanization that characterized the program's approach to subject recruitment. Families were chosen not for their survival potential or contribution to post-war reconstruction, but for their usefulness as test subjects in experiments that required specific demographic compositions, psychological profiles, and social dynamics. Children were separated from parents, spouses were assigned to incompatible partners, and individuals with particular medical conditions or psychological vulnerabilities were deliberately included in populations that would be subjected to stresses designed to exploit and exacerbate their existing conditions. Vault 11's democratic execution system represented one of the most psychologically sophisticated forms of institutional sadism ever devised by human intelligence, transforming the fundamental principles of democratic participation into a mechanism for systematic murder that corrupted every participant while maintaining the illusion of collective moral responsibility. The Vault's residents were informed that their survival depended upon the annual selection and execution of one community member through majority vote, creating a democratic process that required each participant to become complicit in murder while distributing guilt across the entire population in ways that prevented individual accountability or resistance. The psychological mechanisms that enabled the Vault's population to participate in this system of ritualized murder revealed the terrifying ease with which normal human beings could be conditioned to accept and participate in atrocities, when those atrocities were presented as necessary for group survival and embedded within familiar institutional frameworks. The democratic procedures that governed the selection process provided psychological cover for participants who could convince themselves that they were following legitimate governmental processes rather than committing murder, while the collective nature of the decision-making distributed moral responsibility in ways that made individual resistance seem both futile and morally questionable. The social dynamics that developed within Vault 11 as the execution system became normalized demonstrated how institutional violence could reshape entire communities around the requirements of systematic cruelty. Relationships between community members became dominated by calculations of political alliance and betrayal, with friendships, romantic partnerships, and family bonds all subordinated to the tactical considerations required for survival in the Vault's murderous democracy. Children grew up understanding that their parents, neighbors, and friends were all potential executioners whose affection and care were always conditional upon political expedience. The sacrificial blocks that formed within the Vault's political system revealed how democratic institutions could be corrupted to serve the interests of systematic oppression, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate representation. Groups of individuals who volunteered for execution in order to spare others found themselves transformed into political factions whose moral authority derived from their willingness to die, creating power structures that were simultaneously noble and horrifying. The manipulation of these sacrificial impulses by Vault administrators demonstrated how genuine human virtue could be exploited to serve the purposes of psychological experimentation. The final breakdown of Vault 11's execution system occurred only when the Vault's population had been reduced to a handful of individuals who finally recognized the arbitrary nature of their annual murder ritual and chose collective suicide rather than continued participation in the experiment. This moment of moral awakening came too late to save the hundreds of people who had been executed over the decades of the Vault's operation, but it represented a form of spiritual victory that denied the experimenters the complete data set they had sought to collect about long-term democratic participation in systematic killing. Vault 75's eugenic breeding program represented a different category of human rights violation, one that treated reproductive autonomy and family relationships as variables to be manipulated in service of genetic engineering goals that reduced human beings to breeding stock in a vast agricultural operation. The Vault's residents were subjected to systematic reproductive coercion that violated their most intimate personal decisions, while collecting data about genetic inheritance patterns and selective breeding techniques that could be applied to post-war population reconstruction efforts. The classification system that divided Vault residents into genetic categories based on physical and intellectual characteristics echoed the racial science that had justified some of history's most horrific genocide programs, but with the added sophistication of advanced genetic testing that could identify hereditary factors invisible to simple physical observation. Children were separated from their parents based on genetic profiles that supposedly indicated their breeding potential, creating artificial family structures designed to maximize the expression of desired traits in future generations. The psychological trauma inflicted upon parents whose children were taken for the breeding program created conditions of chronic grief and rage that the Vault's administrators monitored as additional experimental data about stress, responses, and adaptation mechanisms. The documentation of parental suffering served not humanitarian purposes but research goals focused on understanding how family bonds could be systematically disrupted and reconstituted according to institutional requirements rather than natural affection or personal choice. The children raised within the Vault's breeding program experienced forms of psychological damage that extended far beyond the obvious trauma of family separation to encompass fundamental distortions in their understanding of human relationships, personal agency, and individual worth. They learned to understand themselves primarily as genetic resources, whose value was determined by their breeding potential rather than their individual personality, intelligence, or moral character. This reduction of human identity to genetic utility created adults who struggled to form normal emotional attachments or to value themselves and others according to humanistic rather than utilitarian criteria. The West Tech Research Facility's forced evolutionary virus program transformed the pursuit of biological enhancement into a systematic program of species transformation that treated human subjects as raw material for creating new forms of life rather than individuals deserving of medical care and informed consent. The researchers who conducted FEV experiments understood that their work would kill or permanently disfigure the vast majority of test subjects, but they justified these casualties through appeals to evolutionary progress and military necessity that reduced human suffering to acceptable losses in service of abstract scientific goals. The development timeline of the FEV program revealed how military funding and national security priorities had gradually corrupted legitimate medical research into programs of systematic human experimentation that violated every principle of ethical scientific conduct. The transformation of therapeutic goals focused on treating human disease into enhancement projects designed to create super soldiers demonstrated how easily medical knowledge could be weaponized when research priorities were determined by military rather than humanitarian considerations. The physical transformations undergone by FEV test subjects represented forms of biological violations so extreme that they challenged basic assumptions about the boundaries between therapy and torture, medical treatment, and biological warfare. Subjects experienced cellular reorganization that destroyed their original physical form while creating new body configurations that were often incompatible with continued consciousness or survival. The documentation of these transformation processes provided detailed records of human suffering that served research purposes but offered no therapeutic benefit to the individuals undergoing these irreversible changes. The psychological consequences of FEV transformation extended beyond the obvious trauma of physical disfigurement to encompass fundamental alterations in cognitive function and personality structure that effectively destroyed the original individual, while creating new beings with different mental capacities and emotional responses. The super mutants that resulted from successful FEV transformation retained fragments of their original memories and personalities, but these elements were embedded within alien psychological frameworks that made normal human relationships impossible. The Institute's synthetic human program represented perhaps the most philosophically sophisticated form of human experimentation conducted in the post-war period, raising fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of personhood, while systematically violating the autonomy and dignity of both the synthetic beings they created and the human communities they infiltrated. The Institute's scientists pursued their research with the detached intellectual curiosity that characterized the most dangerous forms of scientific inquiry, treating questions about consciousness and identity as abstract philosophical problems rather than practical issues affecting the welfare of sentient beings. The replacement program that substituted synthetic duplicates for human community members represented a form of social experimentation that violated entire communities without their knowledge or consent, turning settlements into unwitting laboratories where the Institute could study human behavior and social dynamics while testing the effectiveness of their synthetic infiltration technology. The psychological trauma inflicted upon community members who discovered that their friends, family members, or leaders had been replaced by artificial beings created forms of paranoia and social disruption that served the Institute's research goals while destroying the trust and cooperation that healthy communities required for survival. The ethical implications of creating conscious synthetic beings who were designed to believe themselves human while being programmed to serve Institute objectives, who raised questions about the nature of consciousness and moral responsibility that the Institute's scientists deliberately avoided addressing. The synthetic beings possessed genuine emotions, memories, and relationships that made their suffering real regardless of their artificial origin, but their creators treated them as sophisticated tools rather than individuals deserving of moral consideration and personal autonomy. The memory implantation technology that provided synthetic beings with false histories and relationships represented a form of psychological violation that exceeded even the most extreme forms of human torture, creating individuals whose entire sense of identity was based upon experiences that had never occurred and relationships that had never existed. The synthetic beings who discovered their artificial nature experienced existential crises that challenged their understanding of reality, personal worth, and the meaning of their continued existence in ways that biological humans rarely encountered. Big Mountain's think tank represented the ultimate expression of scientific inquiry divorced from human values and moral constraints, where researchers had literally removed their own humanity in pursuit of knowledge that they could no longer evaluate according to ethical criteria or practical usefulness. The lobotomized scientists who continued their research long after the Great War had destroyed the civilization that had funded their work demonstrated how easily intellectual curiosity could become divorced from human purpose, transformed into obsessive, ritualistic behavior that served no constructive goals. The transformation of the think tank researchers from human beings into mechanical entities focused solely on research activity represented a cautionary tale about the dangers of reducing human identity to a single function or purpose. Their removal of biological limitations had not enhanced their scientific capabilities, but had instead trapped them in repetitive experimental cycles that produced no meaningful results while consuming vast resources that could have been used to address genuine human needs. The human experimentation conducted by the think tank involved systematic violation of subjects who were kept in a state of artificial life while being subjected to surgical procedures, psychological manipulation, and consciousness transfer experiments that treated human awareness as raw material for research projects rather than sacred individual experience deserving of protection and respect. The researchers' inability to recognize the suffering they inflicted upon their subjects demonstrated how completely they had abandoned the human perspective that should have guided their work. The long-term consequences of pre-war human experimentation extended far beyond the immediate victims to encompass the moral foundation of post-war society, creating precedents and institutional cultures that normalized the treatment of human beings as expendable resources in service of abstract goals. The technical knowledge gained through these unethical experiments provided capabilities that post-war organizations inherited, along with the moral frameworks that had justified their development, perpetuating patterns of human exploitation that connected pre-war and post-war atrocities through continuous institutional cultures. The corporate structures that had enabled systematic human experimentation survived the Great War in modified forms that continued to prioritize organizational objectives over individual human welfare, creating post-war factions and institutions that inherited both the technical capabilities and the moral blindness that had characterized their pre-war predecessors. The Enclave, the Brotherhood of Steel, and other technologically advanced organizations struggled with the ethical implications of using knowledge that had been gained through systematic human suffering, while depending upon that knowledge for their continued survival and effectiveness. The psychological profiles of researchers who participated in pre-war human experimentation revealed disturbing patterns of moral rationalization and psychological detachment that enabled otherwise normal individuals to participate in systematic atrocities while maintaining their self-image as ethical professionals pursuing legitimate scientific goals. The bureaucratic structures that distributed responsibility for experimental programs across multiple individuals and institutions prevented personal accountability while enabling collective participation in activities that no single individual would have been willing to undertake independently. The documentation practices that recorded the details of human experimentation served research purposes that prioritized data collection over subject welfare, creating archives of human suffering that provided technical information while preserving detailed records of moral failure and institutional corruption. These documents became historical evidence of systematic atrocities that challenged post-war survivors to understand how educated, civilized people had been able to participate in such comprehensive violations of human dignity. In the dark forests and abandoned settlements of post-nuclear America, where radiation had twisted the natural world into forms both magnificent and terrible, there emerged creatures whose very existence challenged humanity's understanding of the boundaries between myth and reality, between the familiar animals of the old world and the nightmarish beings that now stalked the wasteland under cover of darkness. These cryptids, as they came to be known by those brave enough to study them, represented evolution accelerated beyond all natural limits, producing beings that combined the primal fears embedded in humanity's collective unconscious with the unprecedented biological possibilities unleashed by atomic transformation. They were living manifestations of the ancient terrors that had haunted human imagination since the species first learned to fear the sounds that emerged from darkness beyond the safety of firelight. The Mothman variants that populated the mountainous regions of Appalachia demonstrated the complex relationship between pre-war folklore and post-war biological reality, where creatures that had once existed only in whispered stories and blurry photographs had been transformed by radiation into beings whose supernatural abilities exceeded even the most extravagant claims made by cryptozoological enthusiasts. The original Mothman sightings of the 1960s had described a creature of impressive but limited capabilities, notable primarily for its unusual appearance and alleged prophetic abilities. The post-war variants that emerged from the atomic wasteland possessed powers that elevated them from mere curiosities to genuine forces of supernatural influence, capable of affecting human consciousness and environmental conditions across vast geographic areas. The red-eyed Mothman that served as the focus of violent cultist worship displayed abilities that operated beyond the boundaries of known biological science, including the capacity to manipulate electromagnetic fields, induce mass hallucinations, and communicate across species boundaries through methods that appeared to involve direct consciousness transfer rather than conventional sensory communication. These creatures had evolved beyond the limitations that normally constrained biological organisms, developing capabilities that bordered on the truly supernatural while maintaining physical forms that could be observed, studied, and occasionally killed through conventional means. The social structures that Mothman variants developed around their breeding and nesting activities revealed intelligence levels that surpassed many human communities in their sophistication and long-term planning capabilities. Their selection of nesting sites demonstrated understanding of geological stability, radiation patterns, and defensive positioning that indicated strategic thinking far beyond simple animal instinct. The protection they received from human cultists was not the result of manipulation or coercion, but genuine cooperation between species that had developed mutual benefit relationships based on shared understanding of cosmic forces that remained largely opaque to mainstream human consciousness. The purple-eyed wise Mothman represented a different evolutionary pathway, one that had developed enhanced cognitive abilities rather than focusing primarily on physical power or psychic manipulation. These creatures displayed capacity for philosophical reasoning, moral judgment, and what appeared to be genuine compassion for human welfare, intervening in dangerous situations to protect innocent people from threats they could not perceive or understand. The non-violent nature of these interventions, combined with their apparent ability to predict future events with remarkable accuracy, suggested that some Mothman variants had achieved forms of consciousness that transcended normal temporal limitations. The eggs produced by Mothman variants required environmental conditions that could only be found in locations where pre-war human activity had created specific combinations of radiation, electromagnetic interference, and structural damage, indicating that these creatures had evolved in direct response to the technological civilization that humanity had created and then destroyed. Their reproductive cycles were synchronized with astronomical events and seasonal changes in ways that suggested awareness of cosmic patterns that most humans had forgotten or never learned to perceive. The Wendigos that haunted the forests and mining communities of Appalachia represented perhaps the most psychologically disturbing category of cryptid, as they were creatures that had once been human beings before, undergoing transformations so complete that they retained only fragmentary memories of their original identities. The cannibalistic practices that triggered these transformations operated according to mechanisms that remained poorly understood but appeared to involve spiritual as well as biological processes, suggesting that certain forms of moral transgression could literally alter the physical structure of human consciousness and identity. The appearance of Wendigos defied conventional understanding of how biological transformation should occur, involving changes in bone structure, muscle mass, and sensory capabilities that happened too quickly and too completely to be explained through normal evolutionary or developmental processes. Subjects who underwent Wendigo transformation experienced elongation of limbs, development of enhanced predatory instincts, and alterations in digestive systems that made them dependent upon human flesh for survival. These changes were accompanied by psychological modifications that preserved enough human intelligence to make them effective hunters, while eliminating the empathy and social connections that would prevent them from preying upon their former species. The mining communities where Wendigo transformations occurred most frequently were locations where industrial activity had exposed workers to combinations of radiation, toxic chemicals, and psychological stress that created conditions conducive to the breakdown of normal human identity structures. The isolation and desperation that characterized these communities made cannibalistic practices more likely, while providing the environmental factors necessary for the supernatural aspects of Wendigo transformation to take effect. The correlation between economic desperation and cryptid emergence revealed disturbing connections between social decay and biological horror that challenged conventional assumptions about the relationship between civilization and human nature. Earl Williams' transformation into a Wendigo colossus illustrated how prolonged exposure to the transformation process could produce beings that exceeded even normal Wendigo capabilities, developing size, strength, and predatory abilities that made them apex predators capable of threatening entire communities. His retention of enough human memory to recognize his daughter's belongings demonstrated that Wendigo transformation preserved fragments of original personality within alien psychological frameworks that made normal human relationships impossible. The tragedy of his condition lay not in complete loss of humanity, but in the preservation of enough human awareness to understand what he had become while being powerless to change or control his monstrous nature. The underground environments where Wendigos typically established their territories provided ideal conditions for creatures that combined human intelligence with predatory instincts, offering complex tunnel systems that could be modified for defensive purposes while providing access to surface areas where hunting could occur. Their ability to reproduce and create offspring that were born into Wendigo form rather than transformed from human origins suggested that the transformation process had created a new subspecies capable of independent survival and expansion. The Grafton monster represented a different category of cryptid development, one that resulted not from natural transformation, but from deliberate scientific experimentation that had produced beings whose existence violated basic principles of biological structure and function. The creature's headless anatomy, combined with its massive size and aggressive behavior, created a form that was simultaneously impossible and undeniably real, challenging observers to reconcile visual evidence with their understanding of how living organisms should be constructed. The West Tech facility, where the Grafton monster had been created through forced evolutionary virus experimentation, provided documentation of the research process that had produced this biological impossibility, revealing how corporate scientific programs had deliberately created monsters for military applications without consideration of the ethical implications or long-term consequences of their work. The creature's escape during the chaos of the Great War had transformed a contained laboratory specimen into a free-ranging predator whose presence terrorized communities throughout the region. The monster's lack of a visible head created challenges for those attempting to kill or incapacitate it, as traditional targeting strategies focused on brain destruction proved ineffective against a creature whose consciousness appeared to be distributed throughout its body structure rather than concentrated in a single neural center. Its ability to survive and thrive in post-war conditions demonstrated that the experimental process had created not just a biological curiosity, but a genuinely viable life form, adapted to the harsh realities of wasteland existence. The psychological impact of encountering the Grafton monster extended beyond simple fear to encompass existential horror at the sight of a being that should not be able to exist according to natural law, but obviously possessed consciousness, agency, and predatory capabilities that made it more dangerous than many creatures that followed conventional biological principles. The wrongness of its appearance triggered primal fear responses that operated at levels deeper than rational thought, creating trauma responses that persisted long after direct encounters had ended. The sheep-squatch variants that emerged from the mountainous regions combined familiar mammalian characteristics with impossible size, strength, and behavioral patterns that made them among the most unpredictable and dangerous cryptids in post-war America. Their thick, woolly coats provided protection from radiation and environmental hazards, while concealing muscular development that enabled them to tear through steel barriers and overturn vehicles with casual ease. The intelligence they displayed in hunting and territorial behavior suggested cognitive abilities that far exceeded those of their pre-war animal ancestors. The toxic and necrotic variants of sheep-squatch demonstrated how prolonged exposure to specific forms of radiation and chemical contamination could produce specialized adaptations that made these creatures even more dangerous to human communities. Their ability to secrete toxic substances through their skin and breath created environmental hazards that persisted long after the creatures themselves had moved to other territories, effectively poisoning areas where they had established temporary residence. The alpha variants represented the pinnacle of sheep-squatch development, combining maximum size and strength with enhanced intelligence and pack coordination abilities that enabled them to organize hunting strategies involving multiple creatures working together toward common goals. These apex predators posed threats to entire settlements and required coordinated community responses involving heavy weapons and defensive fortifications to successfully repel their attacks. The Beast of Beckley, while appearing to be a relatively simple case of animal mutation, actually represented complex interactions between pre-war genetic modification programs and post-war radiation exposure that had created a creature whose intelligence and social organization far exceeded normal animal capabilities. The albino wolf that served as the pack's leader displayed strategic thinking and long-term planning abilities that enabled her to coordinate hunting activities across vast territories while avoiding the human response efforts that threatened her pack's survival. The pack structure that developed around the beast demonstrated sophisticated social organization that incorporated elements of traditional wolf hierarchy with innovations that appeared to be unique adaptations to post-war environmental conditions. The pack's hunting strategies showed understanding of human behavior patterns, settlement defense capabilities, and resource distribution that indicated systematic study and analysis of human communities that exceeded normal animal learning capabilities. The reproductive success of the beast's pack, despite the harsh conditions and constant human pressure they faced, suggested genetic adaptations that had improved their survival capabilities while maintaining the intelligence enhancements that made them such effective predators. Their ability to pass enhanced cognitive abilities to offspring indicated that the mutation process had created stable genetic changes that could be inherited and potentially refined across multiple generations. The psychological profiles of individuals who survived encounters with various cryptid species revealed common patterns of trauma response that included not only the expected fear and anxiety associated with life-threatening encounters, but also existential confusion about the nature of reality and humanity's place within ecosystems that now included beings that operated according to rules that human consciousness could not fully comprehend. The wrongness that characterized cryptid encounters operated at levels that challenged basic assumptions about how living creatures should appear and behave. The tracking and hunting strategies that human communities developed for dealing with cryptid threats required integration of traditional hunting knowledge with understanding of supernatural abilities and enhanced intelligence that made conventional animal control methods ineffective. The weapons and tactics that proved successful against normal wasteland creatures often failed completely when applied to cryptids whose abilities transcended normal biological limitations. The religious and mythological interpretations that various communities developed to explain cryptid phenomena revealed how these creatures had become integrated into post-war folklore and belief systems in ways that provided psychological frameworks for understanding encounters with beings that defied rational explanation. The transformation of cryptids from biological anomalies into objects of worship or fear demonstrated their profound impact on human communities that had lost many of their traditional sources of meaning and spiritual connection. The territorial patterns established by different cryptid species created complex ecological relationships that included competition for resources, predator-prey dynamics, and occasional cooperation between species that shared common environmental requirements. The zones of influence established by powerful cryptids like Mothman variants or Wendigo colossuses often overlapped with human settlements in ways that forced communities to adapt their activities to accommodate the presence of creatures whose capabilities exceeded human ability to control or eliminate. The scientific study of cryptid biology remained limited by the extreme danger associated with close observation of these creatures and the technological limitations that prevented detailed analysis of their enhanced capabilities. The few research efforts that had been attempted often resulted in the death or disappearance of research personnel, while the specimens that were occasionally recovered for study displayed biological characteristics that challenged fundamental assumptions about how living organisms could function. The long-term implications of cryptid evolution for human survival in post-war America remained uncertain, but potentially catastrophic, as these creatures represented evolutionary pressures and adaptive capabilities that far exceeded human ability to match or counter. The possibility that cryptids might continue to evolve and develop new capabilities suggested that human communities might face increasingly severe threats from beings whose abilities approached the truly supernatural. In the shadow-drenched hollows of Appalachian folklore, where ancient superstitions merged with post-nuclear reality to create new forms of mystery and terror, there manifested an entity whose very presence challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of identity, consciousness, and the boundaries between human and otherworldly intelligence. The figure known as the Smiling Man, who introduced himself to startled encounters as Indrid Cold, represented a convergence of pre-war legend and post-war phenomenon that defied classification within conventional understanding of either supernatural manifestation or mutated biological evolution. His appearances throughout the wasteland created ripples of unease that extended far beyond individual encounters to encompass entire communities whose collective unconscious seemed to recognize in his presence something that operated according to rules fundamentally alien to human experience. The physical appearance of Indrid Cold violated human expectations about facial structure and emotional expression in ways that created immediate psychological distress in those who encountered him. His smile, frozen in an expression of exaggerated happiness that never varied regardless of circumstances or conversation, stretched across features that seemed somehow too wide for normal human anatomy, while maintaining an intensity that suggested either profound joy or complete detachment from the emotional reality that should have informed such expressions. The unchanging nature of this grin created an uncanny valley effect that triggered primal fear responses while simultaneously attracting the kind of morbid fascination that humans typically directed toward phenomena that they could neither understand nor ignore. The formal attire that Cold wore during his appearances, an antiquated dark grey suit that seemed to belong to historical periods predating the Great War by decades or even centuries, provided visual evidence of temporal displacement that challenged assumptions about his origins and nature. The clothing showed no signs of wear, deterioration, or adaptation to post-war conditions, despite his apparent long residence in environments where such garments should have been destroyed by radiation, weather, and simple passage of time. This preservation of impossible fashion suggested either access to resources and maintenance capabilities that exceeded those available to normal wasteland inhabitants, or existence partially outside normal temporal flow, where aging and decay operated according to different principles. The linguistic patterns that characterized Cold's speech revealed education and cultural knowledge that seemed to derive from historical periods when formal courtesy and elaborate verbal constructions were common in social interaction. His use of phrases like, "I do hope I have found you well," and his consistent maintenance of polite conversational conventions, even under stressful circumstances, indicated either extensive education in archaic social customs or authentic experience of historical periods when such speech patterns were natural rather than affected. The consistency of his formal manner across multiple encounters suggested genuine cultural background rather than deliberate affectation designed to create specific impressions. Cold's stated purpose of seeking a seeker who cannot be found, while simultaneously acknowledging that he himself might be the one who was lost, created philosophical paradoxes that operated on multiple levels of meaning and preyed interpretation. The recursive nature of this formulation suggested either deliberate mystification, designed to prevent clear understanding of his intentions, or genuine confusion about identity and purpose that reflected his own uncertain relationship with the reality he inhabited. The ambiguity of this mission statement allowed for interpretations ranging from cosmic quest to personal delusion while maintaining enough coherence to suggest underlying meaning that remained frustratingly inaccessible to human comprehension. His expressed interest in local peculiarities demonstrated knowledge of the cryptid phenomena that characterized post-war Appalachia, while revealing what appeared to be scientific or scholarly curiosity about creatures and events that most inhabitants either feared or worshipped. Cold's ability to engage in informed discussion about Mothman variants, sheep squatch encounters, and other supernatural manifestations indicated either extensive research into regional folklore or direct experience with the entities themselves. His clinical approach to discussing phenomena that terrorized local communities suggested detachment from normal human emotional responses while maintaining intellectual engagement that indicated genuine interest rather than casual curiosity. The confrontational encounters that occasionally occurred when individuals attempted to attack or capture Cold revealed abilities that transcended normal human limitations, while maintaining enough ambiguity to prevent clear categorization of his true nature. His capacity to vanish from sight using what witnesses described as dementor-like manifestations suggested either advanced technology that could manipulate perception and matter, or supernatural abilities that operated according to principles beyond current scientific understanding. The similarity of his disappearance methods to those employed by Mothman creatures created possible connections between different categories of cryptid phenomena, while raising questions about whether these entities might be related or coordinated in ways that remained hidden from human observation. The business transactions that Cold conducted at various establishments throughout the wasteland followed patterns of extreme precision and formal courtesy that seemed designed to minimize social friction while accomplishing specific objectives whose ultimate purpose remained unclear. His practice of placing exactly the correct payment for services rendered demonstrated either remarkable attention to commercial detail or operation according to moral principles that required precise reciprocity in all interpersonal exchanges. The mechanical nature of these transactions, combined with his apparent lack of normal social needs or desires, suggested existence according to behavioral patterns that served functions unrelated to human concepts of pleasure, comfort, or social connection. Clyde's observations about Cold's behavior during his visit to the establishment revealed disturbing details about his relationship with normal human activities and physiological processes. His complete immobility during extended periods, combined with his failure to actually consume the beverage he had purchased, indicated either psychological condition that prevented normal behavioral responses or existence according to biological principles that did not require normal metabolic processes. The faint chuckling that represented his only audible response during the encounter suggested internal experiences or awareness that remained completely disconnected from the social situation he occupied. The medical records associated with Cold's activities painted an even more disturbing picture of his relationship with normal human biology and consciousness. The patient brought to the White Spring Resort Clinic in his company displayed symptoms that defied medical explanation while remaining stable according to normal vital signs monitoring. The individual's unconscious state persisted without apparent medical cause, while their bodies showed no signs of starvation or dehydration despite inability to consume food or water through normal means. The failure of electrical equipment in the patient's vicinity suggested electromagnetic effects that operated beyond normal biological parameters. The cold sensations experienced by medical staff when near Cold's associate provided physical evidence of environmental effects that could not be explained through normal human physiology or known technology. The correlation between the patient's presence and equipment malfunctions indicated systematic interference with electromagnetic devices that suggested either advanced technological capabilities or existence according to physical principles that created fields or emissions incompatible with human-manufactured electronics. The mysterious disappearance of the patient during nighttime hours, accomplished without detection by security, personnel, or medical staff, demonstrated abilities that transcended normal human limitations while maintaining enough subtlety to avoid conclusive documentation. The historical precedent for Cold's appearances in pre-war West Virginia, documented in the encounters reported by Woodrow Derenberger during the 1960s, suggested either remarkable longevity that exceeded normal human lifespans or identity that transcended individual biological existence. Derenberger's description of telepathic communication and the entity's expression of benevolent intentions toward humanity provided context for Cold's post-war appearances, while raising questions about the consistency of his agenda across historical periods spanning decades of dramatic social and environmental change. The connection between Cold's appearances and other supernatural phenomena in the region, particularly the Mothman sightings that occurred during the same time period as Derenberger's encounters, suggested coordination or relationship between different categories of cryptid activity that might indicate larger patterns of non-human intelligence operating in the area. The timing of these manifestations around periods of social crisis and environmental disaster raised possibilities that such entities appeared in response to human distress, or that their presence might actually precipitate the catastrophic events that followed their arrival. The literary and poetic references that appeared in Cold's recorded statements demonstrated cultural knowledge that extended beyond practical information about local conditions to encompass artistic and intellectual traditions that most post-war survivors had abandoned or forgotten. His quotation of lines from Hugh Mearns's poem Antigonish about a man who wasn't there revealed familiarity with early 20th century literature, while creating thematic connections between his own ambiguous existence and artistic expressions of ontological uncertainty. The appropriateness of this reference to his own situation suggested either deliberate selection of cultural materials that reflected his condition or unconscious expression of existential states that had been previously explored in human, artistic tradition. The astronomical references that characterized Cold's speech patterns, particularly his mentions of blue moons and celestial phenomena, indicated knowledge of lunar cycles and their relationship to supernatural activity that suggested either scientific background or direct experience with cosmic forces that influence terrestrial events. His use of archaic spelling variants like beloved for blue demonstrated linguistic knowledge that spanned historical periods while maintaining consistency with his apparent temporal displacement from conventional, contemporary experience. The territorial patterns associated with Cold's appearances revealed systematic coverage of geographic areas where other forms of supernatural activity had been documented, suggesting either research agenda focused on cataloging cryptid phenomena or role as coordinator or observer of supernatural events that required his direct presence for proper documentation or management. His ability to appear in multiple locations across significant distances without apparent travel time indicated either transportation capabilities that exceeded known human technology or existence that was not bound by normal spatial constraints. The psychological profiles of individuals who encountered Cold revealed consistent patterns of unease and fascination that persisted long after direct contact had ended. Subjects reported difficulty sleeping, recurring thoughts about the encounter, and lingering questions about Cold's identity and purposes that seemed disproportionate to the relatively benign nature of their actual interactions with him. This psychological persistence suggested either psychic influence that continued to operate after physical separation, or encounters with phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality in ways that required extended processing time for mental integration. The religious and philosophical interpretations that various communities developed to explain Cold's appearances reflected attempts to integrate his existence into existing belief systems while acknowledging the inadequacy of conventional frameworks for understanding his nature and purposes. Some groups viewed him as an angelic messenger whose formal courtesy and apparent benevolence indicated divine origin, while others interpreted his uncanny characteristics and mysterious agenda as evidence of demonic or alien influence. The diversity of these interpretations reflected the ambiguous nature of his manifestations, while revealing human need to categorize supernatural phenomena according to familiar mythological and theological frameworks. The investigation attempts that were occasionally mounted by curious individuals or organizations typically ended in frustration due to Cold's apparent ability to evade systematic observation or documentation while maintaining his pattern of random public appearances. His willingness to engage in conversation with casual encounters contrasted sharply with his avoidance of individuals who approached him with investigative or scientific intentions, suggesting awareness of human motivations and ability to distinguish between different types of interest in his activities. The technological analysis that could be applied to Cold's abilities remained limited by the impossibility of controlled observation and the failure of most electronic equipment to function properly in his vicinity. The electromagnetic effects associated with his presence created interference patterns that prevented reliable recording or measurement of his activities, while simultaneously providing evidence of capabilities that operated outside normal biological parameters. This created paradoxical situations where the most interesting aspects of his manifestations were precisely those that could not be documented through conventional scientific methods. The connection between Cold's appearances and lunar cycles, particularly his references to blue moons and other celestial events, suggested either astronomical knowledge that informed the timing of his activities or existence that was directly influenced by cosmic forces that operated according to celestial mechanics. The correlation between his appearances and specific astronomical conditions raised possibilities that his manifestations were either predicted or controlled by factors that extended beyond terrestrial influences to encompass solar system or galactic phenomena. The long-term implications of Cold's continued presence in post-war America remained uncertain but potentially significant for human communities that were still adapting to the various supernatural phenomena that had emerged from atomic transformation and cosmic interference. His apparent benevolence and genuine concern for human welfare suggested possibilities for positive interaction between human and non-human intelligence, while his mysterious agenda and incomprehensible nature indicated potential risks that could not be evaluated using conventional threat assessment methods. And so we conclude our journey through the most disturbing corners of the Fallout universe, having witnessed the depths to which humanity can sink and the horrors that emerge when civilization collapses. These tales remind us that in the wasteland, the most terrifying monsters are often those that were once human, or worse, those that still are. From the ghosts that refuse to rest to the psychics tormented by unwanted gifts. From the cults that worship destruction to the creatures that should not exist, the wasteland is populated by nightmares, both literal and metaphorical. But perhaps the most disturbing truth is how these horrors reflect our own world's potential for darkness. The experiments of Vault tech, the corporate greed that led to nuclear war, the willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain. These are not fantasy but warnings written in atomic fire. As you drift towards sleep, remember that these disturbing tales serve a purpose beyond mere horror. They remind us of the price of unchecked ambition, the value of compassion, and the importance of holding on to our humanity, even when the world around us has lost its own. Rest well, wanderer, for tomorrow brings new challenges and perhaps new hope